Rishi Sunak is reportedly poised to announce his new Northern Ireland Protocol as early as Monday.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on Saturday the 25th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
These are your top stories this morning then, and Rishi Sunak is reportedly preparing to reveal his new Brexit deal after Downing Street claimed he's got last-minute concessions from Brussels. Cabinet ministers said to be on alert for a conference call this weekend, and Westminster is braced for a Northern Ireland Protocol announcement.
Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. A minute's silence was held in the UK, led by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, to pay tribute to Ukrainians everywhere. It comes as the UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace ruled out sending RAF Typhoon jets to the front line.
China has called for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, setting out a 12-point proposal to bring the conflict to a close. It's after reports from the US Secretary of State claiming the country was considering supplying weapons and ammunition to Moscow, although Beijing denied those claims.
And Britain's COVID experts are coming up with contingency plans should the latest outbreak of bird flu start spreading to humans.
We'd love to hear from you this morning, and actually, because we say this quite a lot, because the news is very heavy at the moment. It seems to be, doesn't it get a bit depressing at the moment? So, I mean, if you want to talk about the news, please do. But if you want to talk about anything a little bit lighter, just telling us where you are, what you're up to this Saturday, we would love to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Well, our top story then, first thing, and Conservative MPs have all been told to be in Parliament on Monday, suggesting the Prime Minister could be set to reveal a new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Yes, it will be no mean feat, though, as he faces opposition from both the DUP and his own party, with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson leading the charge to defend the protocol. Let's speak now to the Director of Orthodox Conservatives, Joseph Robertson, who's in the studio with us now. Good morning to you, Joseph. So what do you make of the latest developments?
Well, I think we have to look at this from the perspective of the Unionists more than from the perspective of the Tory party. I mean, this is very much an issue that the DUP have been focused on, you know, for the last, well, however long we've had all of the shenanigans with the protocol bill going on. I think the recalling of MPs shows that Rishi is keen to see an end to this and try to get something through as quickly as possible. But the reality is that any sort of revised deal that doesn't take into account all the demands of the DUP is probably not going to be accepted by the Unionists.
Well, at least some. I mean, you're never going to meet all the demands, are you? But there's got to be. It seems very difficult to see what sort of solution there can be on the basis that at the moment you either have a border across Ireland or you have a border down the Irish Sea, and so they've got to come up with something which has neither of those.
It's a complex situation. I think that it's one that shouldn't be rushed through. I don't think this is dependent on a calendar. I think this is dependent on getting it right. I think this is dependent on giving the people of Northern Ireland something that they actually want to see achieved. I think for too long they've been dealt with almost as a separate part of the Union when they are very much part of the United Kingdom. And I think it's now time to show some of that, certainly from the Tory party. This is an opportunity, for instance, for Boris, certainly, to capitalise on some of that hard Brexit vote, and for Liz Truss as well to come out of the woodwork in particular and sort of say, look, we need to actually listen to the people of Northern Ireland, need to give them something that has no compromise in it.
I was about to ask you about those two characters because they will be watching and listening very closely to this, won't they? How likely is it, do you think, that they could cause trouble on the backbenches?
It's very likely because the traditional membership base is very pro-Northern Ireland, and that's reciprocated in many ways because you have a very patriotic people in Northern Ireland who were adamant that we should have a deal that is more of a hard Brexit, I would say, than what the mainland was wanting. And this is an opportunity now, in particular for Boris, to sort of say, look, I do side with you and I am going to stand up for your voice.
But what is it that he's been... I mean, obviously he's been talking about this over the last few days and trying to push through what he wanted to do whilst he was Prime Minister, which is what I mean, this sort of unilateral decision that we will just do whatever we so choose.
Yeah, I think that's the case as well, and also with Liz. I mean, when she was she was the one who essentially came up with the idea of the Northern Ireland Protocol bill, and these two figures are basically saying that we need to reclaim sovereignty in a total sort of way. That we shouldn't be sort of negotiating.
How do you do that? How do you regain? Because you've got to respect the EU exists. We can't pretend it doesn't exist.
Of course, yeah.
So how do you regain sovereignty without then saying, well, the EU is going to have to put a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Well, it's like dealing with any trading partner. Obviously, it's a negotiation, but the difference in this aspect is that we are close partners with the EU. It's not like we aren't. And I think this is something that we're very keen to stress, and something that is going to hopefully be stressed in Parliament, which is that although there's acrimony, there's a sort of divorce going on at the moment between ourselves and the European Union. We are still part of Europe, okay? And there is still, you know, an understanding, certainly as far as trade goes. I mean, you can't imagine, you know, let's say that one of the Central European countries left tomorrow, that they're just going to have a hard border all the way around their country. It just doesn't make sense. So I think you can have the same standards applied here.
There's clearly a difference in opinion amongst Tory MPs about whether we go for a hard or soft border. But what is the general consensus? Because there also must be a school of thought that just says, we just want to get this issue sorted now once and for all.
Well, that's, you know, and I think that's going to be the Labour approach for sure. It's going to be, let's consign this to the dustbin of history. But like I said, the main sense of thinking within the party is that this isn't something that just needs an overnight solution. It's something that needs to be focused on with a lot more attention than it's received. This is all happening very suddenly, and it hasn't had the talks and the process that it should have done.
And yet there is, I mean, although, I mean, I get the impression from you that you're thinking, well, whatever's announced on Monday isn't going to actually cut the mustard, as it were. But there's a lot of pressure on Rishi Sunak with this, isn't there? Because if he gets it right, then we get, it's not just about getting the protocol sorted, actually, is it? It's about restoring power sharing in the Northern Ireland Assembly as well, because that's all been stopped as a result of all of this. So actually, there is a lot riding on this.
There's a hell of a lot, and I think the real issue is that you know, the DUP have been explicitly clear. Unless those 7 tests that they've developed are met to a certain degree, there will be no compromise. And I think that's the issue for the Prime Minister. He can't call their bluff. He can't call the bluff on the Unionists. Because if he does that, he's essentially discrediting their power. And I think that would be a very dangerous mistake to make. I think that you would have Stormont continuing in disarray. I don't think you would see a government in Northern Ireland straight away. And that's a big issue. He's got to get that right, and he's got to see how much that is actually in line with what they demand.
How significant, perhaps just interesting, is it that Ursula von der Leyen cancelled her trip to meet with the King a little bit later on? Today it was supposed to be for tea. That is no longer happening. And the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, he's cancelled his trip for next week as well. How much do you think we should read into that about something significant is coming down the track?
Well, I think certainly from von der Leyen's aspect, she's got a history of making political statements with her moves at times when they should be diplomatic ones. So you can probably read into that somewhat. I think there is an element of not malicious intent necessarily, but certainly a chance for her to try and persuade people in a certain direction. I don't know if we've intentionally reciprocated that. I don't think that's the case. I think Cleverly probably had other things going on.
But I mean, it's a suggestion, isn't it, that they've all got their heads down trying to get this finalised?
Well, you would hope so, but from von der Leyen's case, that just hasn't been the attitude we've seen so far. It would be nice to see some of that, but I think they're also committed to no compromise, just as the Unionists are.
But 3 meetings with Rishi Sunak last week with Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, that's a good sign, is it not? That
it's a good sign, but then if she cancels straight afterwards, it's not always the best sign, is it? So I think in the case of Rishi, it's a case of getting this one right. He needs to make sure that he's not compromising with his own side, and he needs to make sure that he's making the compromise you know, in the right places and not against the people of Northern Ireland.
Oh, well, we shall get the details, hopefully, on Monday. We'll talk to you a little bit later on, but for now, Josie, thank you.
Cheers.
Should we have a look at what else is happening for you this morning? And Volodymyr Zelensky says he plans to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping after Beijing yesterday set out a peace plan for the war. The Ukrainian president didn't say when that meeting might happen, but told a news conference it would be beneficial for both countries and for security in the world. But President Biden told ABC News the proposal only benefits Russia.
Detectives investigating the attempted murder of an officer in Omagh in County Tyrone have made a fifth arrest. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical condition after being shot outside a sports centre on Wednesday evening. Police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the incident as terrorist-related, with the new IRA being their main line of inquiry.
Hundreds of people will protest against the privatisation of the NHS in Westminster later on today. Organisers want to emphasise avoidable deaths in the health service. The campaign group We Own It says the government wastes money on privatisation, diverting much-needed resources away from the NHS. Apologies.
Just having a little reshuffle over here.
I'm caught up in all my wires.
Are you
and
sorted
wires
now?
everywhere. I was sitting on my... So if you
You're fine now.
If you could hear anything going rub-a-dub-dub, it's my microphone. I do apologise.
Fix
And
it
your
now.
chair is squeaking as well.
I know, and it's my shoes. I can't seem to get comfortable. I'm like
Having a right morning of it this morning,
Oh,
I tell
dear.
you. So we need a bit of WD-40 for you.
We do, yeah, and you just need to get yourself out of an entanglement.
I'm intertwangled.
Yeah, intertwined.
Anyway, look, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, says the Army's troubled £5.5 billion Ajax tank order is back on track.
Yes, the Ministry of Defence is under heavy criticism for failing to deliver even one single deployable tank. This is almost 13 years since the project began, making the 589 vehicles.
And, of course, all this comes as the Ukrainian president is wanting Western allies to send more military equipment to fight against Russia.
Well, giving an update on the Ajax plans, Ben Wallace says troops are now being trained to use the tanks.
Alongside these trials, they are being delivered into the army and making sure that the units that are destined to have them are starting their training. So there's sort of lots of different ranges of ready. There's ready to take them and start training troops. We've already started to do that. And then the next phases is how you teach them to fight in it and how we're going to do it. And then they eventually become operational or as we call sort of in-service, operationally operating capability. And we'll get there in the next few years, I think, in the operational capability. I think that the actual due date is somewhere in the mid-2020s.
Well, Army veteran Robert Clark joins us now. Good morning to you, Robert. So, the numbers are not looking good, are they? Not one single deployable tank in a 13-year project. It was planned to make 589 vehicles. Why has it been so troubled?
Good morning. It's been troubled for several distinct reasons, to be fair, one of which is actually the Army's problem, which is they've been consistently changing the requirements for the vehicle. The vehicle itself is incredibly complicated. It's designed to fit several roles, which doesn't help. And the Army, like I say, keep changing their mind every now and again what they want out of it. And then we have the bureaucracy within the Ministry of Defence and the civil servants who are leading the programme. They change roles every 18 to 24 months. So just as there's progress or just as obstacles being overcome, they have a change in leadership. And then the problems are inherited to another team who are starting from complete scratch. So we've had this problem now for about 3 years. I wrote a report on it a year and a half ago, detailing these failings, and we're 18 months later. War has returned to Europe, and you'd imagine the sense of urgency would have increased, and it just seems to be dragging on now.
It's interesting that you're blaming bureaucracy. A lot of the problems with the Ajax when people were being trained on it 18 months ago was that it just wasn't working, and the noise levels were absolutely horrific. The vibrations were horrific. So this isn't all about bureaucracy, is it? It's about actually the physical vehicle itself.
No, completely right, Stephen. So the design of the hull is actually manufactured in Spain. So the first 100 hulls, which were manufactured in Spain, they came over and they were all to a completely different specification. The weldings were incorrect. So it started these long-term problems with the vibration, which caused the noise and the hearing damage in troops that were being trained in them. So that started from the beginning. So that was really the first problem. Like I say, we just had these consecutive issues over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. I mean, it is interesting to note the Defence Secretary's optimistic remarks this week. I place a lot of faith personally in Ben Wallace. He's an incredibly capable Defence Secretary. We can see that in how he's handled the Ukraine crisis and other issues in defence. So the fact he's so optimistic now, like I say, that gives cause for some broader optimism going forwards. But it should never have got to this stage. He's mentioned he's inherited this problem several times to try and distance himself away from the project politically. But look, the reality is we're still about 2 or 3 years at least behind schedule, minimum. I've got friends in units who should have been taken over these vehicles for them to use about 3 years ago, and they've still got no sign of them.
So, I mean, at that rate, Ben Wallace's optimism isn't very well founded, is it? Because we hope in 2 or 3 years' time, then the war in Ukraine will be long over. At least we can hope that. What would take the time then, those 2 or 3 years? Would we need specific work to be done to these tanks, of course, but also the training that goes into it as well? There's not many people, I believe, who are actually trained to use these Ajax tanks so far.
No, there's a very small team working in the army, hand in glove with General Dynamics, who are trying to remedy the actual problems. But up till now, I mean, they've been trialling the vehicle for about 4 or 5 years. And in that time, like I say, there's only a handful of soldiers who have been trained on them. It's so far behind schedule that the rapid increase that they have to do now to try and make up sort of lost ground, so to speak, with the continuation of trials, again, it just asks for further delays. The state of the army as it is, these delays are just they're completely unacceptable. So there's cause for optimism going forwards, but like I say, it should not have got to this stage, and it's only hindering the army's sort of combat effectiveness even further.
Yeah, it's hugely depressing, actually, isn't it? Robert, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. I mean, it beggars belief. It really does. At times.
And what a waste of money as well. I mean, to have none of those tanks that are actually deployable. I mean, millions of pounds. And we're talking yesterday about billions of pounds. I mean, we're talking yesterday about military budget and spending and how much more is going to be needed for this war effort. And we have huge wastage such as that. It's not
it's
good,
not on, actually, and it means, more than anything else, we are under-equipped as a British army, and that cannot be right. That cannot be right. But as I say, let's be optimistic. Ben Wallace seems determined to get on top of it. The problem with all of these things is it takes time. It takes a lot of time. The training is going to take a lot of time, and all the rest of it. But it's problematic. But let's hope we are heading in the right direction now. Yeah. Now, as we've been mentioning, yesterday marked the first anniversary since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and there is still no clear end in sight. Well, Britain held a minute's silence in honour of the many thousands of Ukrainians that have died since the conflict began, while Ukraine's allies reaffirmed their commitment to helping the country towards victory over Russia. Well, our reporter Will Hollis has been following events around the one-year anniversary.
It was the siren that signalled the coming change. In a matter of hours, Russia's invasion turned millions of Ukrainians into refugees and transformed tens of thousands of civilians into soldiers. President Zelensky, once a comedian, now a celebrated war leader. We will defeat all threats, he says 1 year on, speaking to his nation. He describes it as a year of bravery and hope, a year of invincibility. The war in the East has been ongoing since 2014, but few believed Russia would launch a full-scale invasion of its neighbour, and in turn that Ukraine could hold out for so long. Since then, 8,000 Ukrainian civilians have died. The true number will be much higher. From the fighting, more than 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers are thought to have been killed. Russian losses could be twice as many. In Britain, the war has been marked with silence. From the start of the invasion, the UK has stood beside its Ukrainian ally. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak welcomed his counterpart in recent weeks. Yesterday, at the Ukrainian Catholic Church in London, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson lighted candles. Meanwhile, King Charles, who met President Zelensky on his visit, said that Ukrainians have endured unimaginable suffering during the war, while applauding support from Britain and its allies. At times symbolic, this street in London renamed Kyiv Road, but weapons are the true signifier of commitment. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki confirmed delivery of the Leopard 2 tanks his country pledged to the cause.
It's not only documents.
Not only documents. Real tanks are also there.
We have freedom. Give us wings to protect it.
Ukraine asks for jets, but Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says it's not as simple as handing them over, but there are other options.
If there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected.
Putin's so-called special military operation, for the most part, has failed. Yet he has mobilised his homeland and has resources for a long war. His friends in China have suggested a constructive ceasefire and de-escalation. It's unknown if the Russian leader is listening. But the world is watching, wondering what might happen next. Will Hollis, GB News.
Those pictures from Kyiv are so moving, aren't they? All of the soldiers just standing in silence.
Do you know what it is? Remembering that, because amongst those people, it's not just it's not like us now when we think of people who've died in the war. There aren't that many of us who actually know someone who has died in conflict, even though, over the past sort of couple of decades, there has been very nearly 500. For most of us, we just sort of think in general terms, don't we? Those men and women there yesterday will have known people who died, and that puts a different spin on it entirely. Yeah, actually.
Absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, more on that coming up. Loads of you getting in touch this morning. Lots on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Terry, hi Terry, says, all this fuss costing millions. As an Irishman, I don't believe we need the hassle. Yeah, Terry, but, I mean, the problem is that there's got to be a solution to this. So, I mean, I get your point, but I don't know quite what the answer is.
Brenda says, personally, I think Rishi Sunak should be applauded for his leadership. It's a very difficult job to do, and I think Sunak is proficient. Martin, similar kind of theme, says, I really hope Rishi Sunak is able to push ahead with his deal. And Martin, I'm sure there's many, many people, including many Tory MPs, who would agree with you, who just want to see this issue dealt with, finally.
You see, Ruth, morning to you, Ruth. I mean, common sense, in a way, Ruth, because you say, in my opinion, I don't believe there's a deal to be made. As Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, shouldn't it be regulated only by British institutes? Well, that's the argument, isn't it? The problem is, Ruth, that obviously Northern Ireland no longer has a hard border with Ireland, and so it's about the flow of goods between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And if you put a hard border in, checkpoints and all that sort of thing, customs and all the rest of it along that border, that then threatens peace in Northern Ireland.
And the Good Friday Agreement. Yeah.
So that's the problem. So I mean, you're quite right. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, therefore should be part of the United Kingdom. But it's that's the obstacle. It's the border that is the problem with all of that. Hopefully, have we got Maggie May lined up in there, gallery team?
Yes, we do.
Good. Yep. Let's show you Maggie May. This from Jackie. Morning to you, Jackie. She says, I'm watching GB News in bed with my 5-month-old puppy, Maggie May, who is a beauty.
Oh,
Morning
look at
to
her.
you
It looks
too.
like she's smiling at us.
I don't know what she is
She
to
looks-
describe for our radio listeners.
I don't know what
Apart from a
breed
dog.
she'd be, but she's very cute.
She's very, very cute.
And very, very fluffy.
Gorgeous.
And extra points for having GB News on in the background, I
Yes.
think. Very, very good. And Roberta says, Stephen and Ellie are stars of the weekend. The A-team.
Oh, Roberta.
Thanks, Roberta.
What are you
very
after?
kind.
What are you after, Roberta?
Yeah.
Free
She wants to come
mug.
sit with us in the middle here.
Okay, be more than welcome. Half our
More the
workload.
merrier, that's what we say.
Now, keep your thoughts coming through. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've got much more to come for you. In a couple of minutes, we'll speak to a COVID data specialist about contingency plans regarding the outbreak of bird flu. Stay tuned. It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
6:28, morning to you. You're watching and listening on the radio, if you are so doing, to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie. The good news about the radio thing is, we used to say this all the time, we've stopped, and I don't know why. If you're watching us on the telly, great. If you then have to head out, or even just pop into the shower, pop the radio on.
There's no excuse.
You don't have to miss a thing.
No. Just pop us on the radio.
Yeah.
And it's lovely on the radio. Do you listen to it?
I do. I listen in the car on the radio, and it works.
It does. I really enjoy
Plus,
it.
you don't have to look at our faces,
Yes.
which is it's a win-win.
It's a lot this time in the morning, so we don't blame you if you're on the radio. It's quite nice, isn't it? In bed, have you had a nice cup of tea now? Maybe something on toast, and pop the radio on. Lovely. That's what I'd rather be.
Are you craving a breakfast?
I am.
What?
I'm going to have a fry-up when I get home.
Are you?
Yeah, the full works.
So I'm back on the health kick now.
Oh, yeah, look. He's had a holiday and he's beating
Had a
himself
holiday.
up now. And
we did loads of exercise. We walked about. We did about 10 miles a day. Right, my feet are killing me. Did 10 miles a day, and I still managed to put about 4 pounds on.
I think you're being very hard on yourself. I think it's mostly water weight and you can't see a thing.
So I'm still.
He's being very nasty to himself.
So I'm back on the diet now. Which is Slimming World, so it's all like no fat. You can have carbs, but no fat.
Yeah,
so
you can have carbs, you're all right.
There's going to have to be porridge when I get home.
Oh, nice. What's your topping of choice?
No, nothing. I just have a little bit of salt.
Oh, gosh. Well, that's very serious. Yeah, can't be saying I'll be joining you on the porridge front. It'll be a fry-up for me.
There you go.
Let us know what you're having for breakfast, please. That's always nice. We always like a food chat here.
Yeah, we do.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, something totally different for you now. UK scientists have begun preparations for a bird flu pandemic as the specialists who orchestrated Britain's UK COVID lockdowns have now begun drawing up plans in case the H5N1 strain worsens.
Now, one girl, aged just 11, has died in Cambodia after contracting the virus, and it's thought a further 12 people are infected there.
Well, since the outbreak began in 2021, just one Briton has been infected with the illness. But now fears are growing that the virus may spread to more humans.
Well, let's talk to data and COVID expert Tim White, who joins us now. Really good to see you this morning. How concerned should we be?
Morning, Stephen. Morning, Ellie. I think at this stage, it's probably slightly more worrying than it needs to be in the public's mind. As you said, in the scientist's mind, contingency plans are being drawn up. There is a vaccine available. They need to make sure that it matches the latest type if we do start seeing more progression from birds to mammals and onto humans. So at the moment, it's the very, very first stages. But it's probably a very good thing that the scientists are in a better position to deal with this outbreak if it continues to multiply. And it would have to get so much worse to be a real concern to the average person, let alone here in the UK.
The message today is do not panic, because already we've had a message in from Sarah this morning who says she sincerely hopes there's not another lockdown. She said, as much as I adore him, I don't want to spend an extended period of time with my husband.
Dear.
So, I mean, that's the thing, though, isn't it? We're so close, really, to the COVID lockdown. That is the first thing that people would think about. They'd hear bird flu, they'd hear pandemic, and they'd instantly panic that there's going to be another lockdown or potentially more deaths. But that's not what we're saying today. We're saying do not panic. That's the message.
Yeah, absolutely, Ellie. The chances of there being a lockdown are infinitesimally small. And I wouldn't have said that about COVID, for instance, at the start. You know, straight away we saw a lot of humans, a lot of people, if you remember those early stages in China, people falling down unexpectedly. This isn't happening. Almost all the people who've been infected, including this girl, were in very close proximity and had probably wild birds or birds that were mixing with wild birds around them all the time. All the cases that we've had in Western Europe have pretty much come from people working with birds. So at the moment, scientists aren't quite aware how it's transmissible. And all we do know is that some of the receptors in the humans are not the same as in other mammals that can pick it up more readily. And even then, it's mainly through, the scientists say, the likes of foxes and badgers eating infected meat, so birds that have contracted the virus. In the UK, we have had quite a few outbreaks of avian flu, H5N1 variant, which is the one we're worried about. And periodically we get farms shut down, bird farms, and then there's a 3-kilometre exclusion zone kind of thing going on. So to try to prevent the spread, it's very, very worrying for bird farmers and people who make their living through birds in the UK. But I think the general public can rest easy for quite a long time yet.
Yeah, so, I mean, again, it's reiterating that point not to panic, but it's encouraging, though, is it? I mean, the fact that they are looking at pandemic planning and all the rest of it. And one of the criticisms, of course, around COVID was that there wasn't enough sort of strategy in place for a pandemic. Well, I guess you can argue they're not going to let that happen again.
Yeah, you did right, Stephen. Actually, the UK and the US were top of the preparedness for pandemics. But COVID just took everyone by surprise in how quickly it spread and the infectiousness of the disease. Whereas here, it's something that they're a little bit more able to control because it isn't spreading between humans as far as we're aware at the moment. As you said, about 12 people are thought to be infected, certainly being tested in the current outbreak in Cambodia. But they are all from the same family. Doesn't mean they transmitted to each other. They may have all picked up the virus separately from the same source, from being around those infected birds, possibly eating the infected birds. We don't exactly know that yet. And that's something where testing is ongoing. But yeah, the good news is that there is a vaccine that we can use against the disease, and it just has to be honed to cope with the latest strain, so it has more impact if it's needed. But we're still such a long way from that. But yeah, there are definitely precautions in place. There are defences in place against H5N1 bird flu. And so I, for one, certainly resting easy in my bed, although I still won't be having porridge this morning.
I don't know what's wrong with you people.
What's
Very
on your
good for
menu,
you.
Tim? What are you going to have for breakfast?
I think I'm a little bit nearer you on the fry-up scale, but it's probably a
Okay.
good job you can't see a little lower than this on the camera, because it could be having
Oh, there you go.
Well,
you see, there
Tim.
you go. It's a disadvantage in working in telly. I've got to try and keep trim, I tell you.
And you
Tim,
do so
I'll
mean
try
to
my best.
himself.
Tim,
Well-
it's really good to talk to you this morning.
Go and
Thanks very
enjoy your
much
fry-up,
indeed.
Tim.
Yeah, enjoy yourself.
Thanks for keeping us calm. Good. So
Well,
don't panic.
Yes, don't panic. But as I say, it's the preparedness is really... We'd only criticise, wouldn't we, if we weren't getting prepared for something. You've got to plan... what did they say? Hope for the best, expect the worst.
yes.
Take what comes.
Yes. And what do the guides say?
Dib, dib, dib.
No, if you
Ding-a-ling.
fail to be...
Oh, sorry.
To prepare to fail is
Is it? Well
prepare
done.
to fail is to fail. To fail to prepare is to prepare to fail.
Well, you got there in the end.
There you go.
Were you a girl
So,
guide?
I was.
Well, you've
Can
just-
you tell? That was just so off the cuff. And just really knew my stuff. Anyway,
Terrifying.
they're preparing. It's not a bad thing to be aware of these things, to be in a good position.
There you go. Well, that's excellent. We got there in the end, ladies and
Anyway.
gents.
Still early, people. It's 6:30 on a Saturday morning.
It is, but don't go anywhere, because
Yes.
you've got the papers heading your way in just a couple of minutes.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
6:38. Good morning to you, watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Now let's take a look at today's front pages for you. And in the Times this morning, we're told that Rishi Sunak faces a battle with Eurosceptics in his own party as he aims to push ahead with his new Brexit deal.
The Guardian says the post-Brexit deal will be the big political gamble of Rishi Sunak's premiership.
The Telegraph says a string of positive breakthroughs during the past week are what has pushed the deal to the final stages. And Puffin Books have pledged to reissue Roald Dahl novels in their original uncensored format.
Thank heavens. The Mail leads on a grieving mother begging the Justice Secretary to keep her daughter's killer behind bars. and a coronation exclusive within which we are told that the King and the Prince of Wales are to refuse Harry's demand for an apology.
And finally, the Mirror reports on Trees Coffee's advice to eat turnips in place of unavailable fresh produce, sparking a shortage of the root vegetable among supermarkets.
Well, that just goes to prove that she was right.
Well, and I also think that could be in part down to us.
We did say how lovely turnips are.
We did. And yesterday we were saying turnips is the way forward, and the Swede is also part of the turnip family, as we established. And now there's a shortage. And I think there could be a link there, don't you?
I think there's a link there. It annoys me a little bit that they're saying, you know, she looks daft because of that, because I don't think she does. I think she's proving that actually we think, oh, yeah, turnip, that'd be nice.
Buy British and buy in season. I think that was the message.
Turnip mash, lovely.
Yeah, lovely on a roast. Now, time to go through the papers, and joining us this morning is writer and journalist Andy Jones and author Ella Whelan. Good morning to you both. Thank you for your company this morning. Ella, let's start with you, shall we? And this in the Times, Brexit deal within days, they say.
Turnip mash, we'll come to that.
Yes. Oh, good, good.
Gross. Yeah. But anyway, Brexit deal. You had a guest on earlier who was talking about this, and one of the things that the Times picks up on is this sort of small detail in which, you know, there are two elements to this. There is the serious element of whether or not this will change the future for people living in Northern Ireland, whether it will fix the hard border question, you know, big political issues. But it's also the sort of sub-level of it is that this could be it could make or break Rishi Sunak's political reputation. And part of that, as the Times reports, is there was this plan, which has been scrapped, for Ursula von der Leyen to travel to Britain to announce the success of the deal and meet with King Charles. And it was going to happen, you know, this was all going to happen with tea at Windsor Palace. And so it was going to be dubbed the Windsor Agreement. Now, you know, what it says about, you know, a vote that was for democracy, that was supposed to be about radical sovereignty and all these things being sort of neatly tied in a bow between a top EU bod and, you know, an unelected monarch. I'm not sure. I don't know whether that's the reason it was scrapped or whether it was just that diaries clashed. But it's just that I think that the whole way in which this has been handled, behind closed doors meetings, I mean, you know, there is a balance, which is that we know that a lot of Brexit negotiations up until now have been scuppered and thwarted by kind of constant media meddling, constant people carping at the sidelines, you know, they're never being able to have any kind of progress. And so that might be an argument for you to say, right, everybody leave us alone and we're just going to hash it out. But the nervous Brexiteer in me says that these people can't necessarily, in particular someone like Rishi Sunak with his political background and being, you know, so cosy with Emmanuel Macron and all the kind of signals that he's been giving throughout his political career, can't be trusted with doing Brexit justice.
The whole cosy with Macron style thing, isn't that a good thing? Isn't that a good, because it's about, if you go head to head with these people, we're in a battle that will go on forever and a day.
That's true.
You've got to persuade them, haven't you?
That's true, but I think that for me anyway, when I watched that relationship, I thought, here are two politicians who really symbolise a kind of the technocratic future of politics, which is no interest in populaces, no interest in radical democracy, or even democracy, sort of generally. But the thing about the Northern Ireland, that the thing about the situation in Northern Ireland that no one wants to really admit is there can't really be a solution or a compromise that everyone agrees with. The DUP is not going to like this, and neither are Remainers, who are still, as we know, trying to, hardline Remainers who are still trying to overthrow the whole thing. So don't crack out the bunting yet, is what I'd say.
Well, we've waffled on about that enough. Let's talk about the next general election, Andy.
Yes.
Keir Starmer's on course for a landslide.
We keep hearing...
I mean, we're probably 2 years out.
Yeah,
it's a
little bit like a football team being top of the Premier League by 10 points at Christmas. You feel like they're very much on course to win the title, but there's a lot of games still to be played. Keir Starmer, according to a poll by YouGov, 17-point lead, 46% of the nation will vote Labour, 29% of the nation will vote Conservative, so they say. Interestingly, Starmer is beating the Conservatives on everything from, everything bar Ukraine. Let's go through it. They prefer Starmer on housing, they prefer Starmer on crime, they prefer Starmer on the economy, the NHS, the cost of living and personal security. It is worth saying this is a poll of 1,500 people. I mean, you could almost get a poll of 1,500 people in this building. So, I mean, these polls are always trumpeted as 17-point lead, colossal decision, colossal swing one way or another. Only 1,500 people, but it is true. You go up and down Britain, and we do this as a broadcast deal. You go up and down Britain, people are very concerned with how the economy is, cost of living, crime. People are, after many years of the Conservative government, perhaps looking for a change. And Keir Starmer been sitting on the fence about certain things. Rishi Sunak's floundering a little bit. Starmer certainly making capital.
Well, yeah, sort of sit there and wait for it to happen in a way. There is an
yeah, I
element
mean,
of that.
you go up and down the country, and I won't ever say I know what the whole nation is saying, but you go up and down the country, and Starmer, Rishi's not really getting cut through. They're concerned about cost of living, they're concerned about different things, and all Rishi's sort of... The only policy people can name is that he wants people to do maths until they're 18, and I'm not sure that's really going to keep food in the cupboard, is it?
No, it might all change come the spring budget, though.
Yeah, and come Monday, if he gets a Brexit deal, I mean, that might be something for Rishi Sunak. Ella, I think we've got time for our turnips.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about this? This is in the Mirror.
Yes, so, you know, as you said at the top, there is a kind of a run on turnips where you can't actually get them in a lot of supermarkets. Whether or not that was sparked by Therese Coffey's comments on... or you guys, yes. I think it's just worth remembering what she said. She said a lot of people would be eating turnips right now rather than thinking about aspects of lettuce and tomatoes. So to be fair, she was hinting at the kind of seasonal argument.
Yeah. I don't know why she's coming for criticism over it.
Well, I think it's because there has been a run of politicians, I'm thinking about 30p Lee Anderson, who have, you know, kind of had a kind of Marie Antoinette tone about them, which at least she said eat cake rather than turnips, which says, you know, nothing to see here. Just, you know, get some potatoes. What's your problem? Like, you know, you can make dinner. And of course, most sensible people know you can do that. You can get by, but it's just not a good look from a government to be saying, never mind, you know, us having high aspirations for, you know, wanting to have
salad.
Or you
really
know,
high aspirations that we can have a salad.
Like, you know, lots of choice, good food, food security being a really important thing in this country that we don't have. Instead, they're sort of saying make do. That's the message that's coming across is make do.
With a turnip, it's a joy.
Well,
turnip.
Turnips are not just my husband loves them and I hate them, so they always sit at the back of my cupboard until they're just not quite mouldy enough, you know, just on the turn, and then he'll peel them and enjoy it once. But there's, you know, it's also important to say that this is not just the realm of Conservative politicians. I remember a number of years ago when Emily Thornberry from the Labour Party came in for some criticism for saying, oh, what poor people need to do is, I'm paraphrasing here, is, you know, they need to be taught how to plant carrots. That's how we'll fix everything. That's how we'll fix healthy food. Politicians have too much opinion on what's on your plate and not enough opinions on how to get more on your plate. There's my take.
No, perhaps a fair point. Something which is to be celebrated, I think, just as a sort of victory for common sense, Andy. Roald Dahl, his books are going to be printed now without really, really offensive words like fat.
Yes.
Included, you know.
So you're going to be able to still buy the classic edition, and you're also going to be able to buy the revised edition.
I mean...
so let's go through some of the specifics of what they've changed. So, for instance, Augustus Gloop, the famously fat... We're allowed to say fat here, aren't we, of course? Fat Augustus Gloop in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he's now described as enormous rather than fat. Now, I don't know, personally, when I feel a little bit fat, I say fat. I'd rather be called fat than enormous.
Yeah. Sounds worse, doesn't it?
Worse. Enormous, being called an enormous child is surely more offensive to parents than a fat child.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, the twits are described as beastly instead of ugly and beastly, and a character in James and the Giant Peach, there's quite a long poem which I won't go through, is described as thin. They're no longer described as thin. The thin has been removed. So no thin, no fat. No thin, no fat, no ugly.
So you can't describe body shape in the new...
No, but you can call them enormous.
You can, yeah. I mean, isn't it just crap?
There's also been, I mean, we were talking in the break about, you know, how the sort of the blind way of approaching kind of words in which the word black has been removed from, for example, describing the BFG's cloak. Yeah, so that, you know, the important thing about children's literature, particularly Roald Dahl, is kids love nasty stuff. They love dark stuff. They love, you know, they don't like sort of sugar plum fairy stories.
But it's all, do you know what? It's always been that. I mean, just after I'd left school, primary school things, it was when the whole you can't say blackboard thing came in. It had to be a chalkboard. Well, I don't call this an ink sheet,
no.
Do I? So it's paper, and that board is, we say whiteboard, but then you can't see that board. I mean, it's all just this stuff like this where it makes no sense.
And I don't think anyone's asking for it. I think that's the really important point.
Yeah.
I would really like Puffin to show its reasoning behind why it did this. Who did it have 10,000 emails in saying, please, I cannot face reading my kid this book anymore?
Because it describes some James.
Yeah,
no,
they did not have that.
It's entirely performative. No child is going to read a cloak described as black. No child of colour is going to read a cloak described as black and say they're saying that I'm a cloak or anything ridiculous.
No.
You can sort of understand at least some of the logic around removing fat, etc., but primary colours that describe a colour of that description is ridiculous.
And it's almost a bit as well, like, where is the line then? If you're going to take that stance on literature, I mean, I went to see To Kill a Mockingbird a few weeks ago, and there's some language in that would not be used today. But it's part of history, it's the literature of the time, and that's important to an audience.
To Kill a Mockingbird is an anti-racist piece of work, in the same way that Huckleberry Finn is. And if you take out that, you lose all the power of what those authors... And also, there's just a point here about artistic freedom. I mean, I know, Roald Dahl's books aren't... It's not great art like you'd imagine, a painting in a museum, but it is still a piece of artistic work which... You have no right to go in and censor because it is what he intended, and it should remain as he intended.
And where do we stop with sizeism as well? Does the BFG now be described as the quite large friendly giant? Yes. I don't know what we do.
The unusually tall.
Yes.
The unusually tall, pally person.
Tall person, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, I'm sure you've got a view on that.
Yeah,
GBnews at gbnews.uk. Ella, Andy, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on. Now, let's tell you about business owners in Sheffield who've told us here at GB News that they may be forced to close when a new clean air zone charge comes into place on Monday.
Yes, the plans have angered many campaigners in a 6,500-strong Facebook group, some of whom will be protesting later this afternoon.
Well, Anna Riley has the full story.
Within the clean air zone in Sheffield, drivers of taxis, vans, buses, coaches and lorries that don't meet the Euro 6 diesel or Euro 4 petrol emission standards will have to pay to travel. Per day, bigger vehicles are charged £50 and smaller vehicles £10. It's been put in place to reduce pollution and through this improve health. But Duncan Strafford's part of a Facebook group challenging the plans, and he believes the CAS will destroy trade in Sheffield.
It will kill the city centre. You've got the market traders that are already struggling because there aren't many people in the city centre. Well, if they're struggling with that, to tax them £70 a day to come in with their goods just makes the whole economic system unsustainable.
This sentiment echoed by Kai Moynihan, who owns 2 coach companies in Sheffield. He's already £60,000 out of pocket through buying and selling vehicles to comply with the CAS.
It's really stressing me out as well, because as you can imagine, the vehicles that I've actually bought, I've had to do some of my savings. I mean, just to give you an example, the business took a £200,000 loss through COVID. It could actually finish the business off, really. The only other option I've actually got is actually sell a lot of the vehicles that I've got and just buy 2 new vehicles. But the actual council don't understand that trying to get a Euro 6 minibus is absolutely impossible. The price of the Mercedes have actually shot up, unbelievable. I mean, a Mercedes minibus, an executive minibus, you were talking probably about £80,000. You're looking now £120,000 plus VAT. And to be honest, I can't really afford it. After all the money I've forked out, I just can't be affording that. And I'm going to need 2 or 3 just to keep the customer and clientele that I've got at the moment.
Kai also believes that the council has the wrong approach to making Sheffield greener.
I think the council's attitude to this, to be honest, I just think they see pound signs. My example, for example, if everyone does pay, the emissions are going to be the same. Only the difference is that the council have got more money in their pocket. So basically, you're paying to pollute. And I understand people's health, I understand your asthma, I understand all that completely. But at the end of the day, that people paying is not going to make people's health any better.
In response to concerns, the council said, "We know that some people may face financial challenges as the scheme is implemented, but we also cannot ignore the urgent and pressing need to tackle the dangerous levels of nitrogen dioxide in our air. We need to do all we can to get as many heavy polluting vehicles off the roads, and the CAS is one way to address this." And this is what people in Sheffield think to the Clean Air Zone.
I am for it. I mean, the figures are there, aren't they? You know, children are suffering due to bad air. They're being hospitalised due to bad air.
I've had to spend several £1,000s on upgrading my van, so it's exempt from the charge, and that money has to be found from somewhere. And lots of businesses are facing the similar problem.
We need cleaner air because it does affect people, especially people that are like asthmatic and have got overlying health conditions and that. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Hundreds are set to turn out in protest this afternoon to show their opposition to the Clean Air Zone charges. Anna Riley, GB News, Sheffield.
I was driving up the motorway last week and saw the signs on the motorway about Sheffield bringing all this in.
Going to happen in a lot of cities now, isn't it?
I just think it's that. But I mean, how do we expect growth in the economy and all the rest of it? I know some things need to be taken. Pollution is a problem and all the rest of it. I'm not belittling that. But then how do you expect growth in a community if you're then going to cripple people with extra charges?
Yeah, and people who might need to buy a new car. I mean, in the cost of living crisis, it's really difficult, really hard.
Difficult.
Let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Lots to come in the next hour. We'll be looking ahead at the expected announcement from Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, over the Northern Ireland Brexit deal. But first, let's look at today's weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. This weekend it's dry and settled. There will be some sunshine, and where those skies remain clear, a return of frost at night too. Looking at the pressure pattern, high pressure dominates right through the weekend and actually much of next week too, keeping all the weather systems behind me out in the Atlantic. Lots of dry and settled weather to come. So this morning, it's a dry start for many, frosty start in places, but plenty of sunshine. Just cloudier skies across the north and the east. Keen northerly breeze at first will bring in showers, this easing as we head through into the afternoon. Lots of places staying dry, the best of the sunshine holding on across parts of Northern Ireland, perhaps western Scotland, but most places dry with some bright spells. Temperatures a little lower than recent days, 6 to 9 Celsius, but that's where we should be for the time of year. Perhaps still feeling chilly along some eastern coast with that northerly breeze. Into the evening time, we'll see the clouds starting to melt away, longer, clearer periods developing, though there's still the risk of a few showers coming in off the North Sea down some eastern coasts. Under the clearest skies for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps Wales and southwest England, -2 to -4 Celsius. So a frost developing here, patchier further east where we see a little bit more cloud. So into Sunday, cloudy across some eastern areas to start. The risk still of a few showers coming through from the North Sea. Best of the sunshine across the northwest, but even here we'll see the cloud move and bubble up as we go into the afternoon. Elsewhere across England and Wales, a lot of cloud into the afternoon, but there will be some bright or sunny spells. The southeast of England seeing the highest temperatures around 9 Celsius in any sunshine. So overall temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius around average for the time of year. Very little change as we go into next week. At the start of next week, high pressure holding on. A lot of cloud around, but there'll be some sunny spells, lots of dry weather, and temperatures still around average. See you again soon.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain.
Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Rishi Sunak is poised to announce a new Northern Ireland protocol as early as Monday.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Saturday the 25th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
These are your top stories this morning then, and the Prime Minister is reportedly preparing to reveal a new Brexit deal after Downing Street claimed he's gained last-minute concessions from Brussels. With Cabinet Ministers said to be on alert for a conference call this weekend, Westminster is braced for a Northern Ireland protocol announcement.
Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. A minute's silence was held in the UK, led by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, to pay tribute to Ukrainians everywhere. It comes as the UK's Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, ruled out sending RAF Typhoon jets to the front line.
China has called for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, setting out a 12-point proposal to bring the conflict to a close. It's after reports from the US Secretary of State saying the country was considering supplying weapons and ammunition to Moscow. That has been denied by Beijing.
And keyless car thefts are on the rise, accounting for 93% of all vehicles stolen last year. We'll be speaking to an expert on how to protect your car against thieves.
And we'd love to hear from you. Loads of you getting in touch this morning. We're going to run through them in just a few minutes. If you want to join in the conversation, GB Views at gbnews.uk. But to start with, Conservative MPs have been told to be in Parliament on Monday, suggesting the Prime Minister could be set to reveal his new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Yes, and it will be no mean feat as he faces opposition from both the DUP and his own party, with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson leading the charge to defend the protocol. Well, let's speak now to Director of Orthodox Conservatives, Joseph Robertson, who joins us in the studio now. So what do you make of these latest developments, Joseph?
Well, I think the first thing to consider is, how we got to this point. And I think in recent weeks, with the hearing in the Supreme Court and various other issues, it's come to a head where the Prime Minister sees this as the time to get things done. And I think one thing that we're certainly urging on is that nothing is rushed. We need to see due process over all elements. Both sides of the story need to be listened to. And I'm hoping that nobody's whips into doing something that is going to go against sentiment in Northern Ireland.
But what there has to be here, and I know the DUP is pushing a very hard line on this, but there's going to have to be compromise on all sides, isn't there?
In a sense, yes, but we are in a constitutional crisis, and that point has to be taken on board, certainly by the Prime Minister and his advisers. We are at a point where Northern Ireland is essentially not acting as part of the United Kingdom, and it needs to return to internal UK markets. It cannot stay under EU legislation. It is simply being de facto governed by a set of laws that don't apply to the rest of the British Isles, and that has to change.
A lot of pressure on Rishi Sunak. I mean, not only, but to restore power sharing in the Northern Ireland Assembly, obviously a huge point. The Guardian newspaper today calling it a political gamble for Rishi Sunak, saying it could make or break his political reputation. How much should we read into that, do you think?
I think there's something to be said for that, simply because his rivals are going to be on manoeuvres to do the opposite of whatever he's doing. I think, you know, we've seen Boris, you know, coming out once again strongly to say that this is going to be, you know, an opportunity to really reclaim that hard Brexit vision that many of the party had. And, you know, Liz Truss as well, sort of saying that this is an opportunity to do what she set out to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill.
Which is what? Which is what? What did they actually want to do that would solve this problem?
Well, I think what they need to do, and probably what they're implying, is that they would be tougher at the negotiation table. I don't know if they have a hard and fast vision, if I'm being perfectly honest, because I think there was too much compromise to start with. But they're seeing, I think, with hindsight, that things need to change, that there is actually better negotiation routes to be had with the EU before we take the plunge into something. And they probably want more time to try and get things right and correct some of those early errors that were made.
How confident are you on a deal?
I'm less confident on getting something that reflects the needs of Northern Ireland, but I am confident that something will go through. My worry is that it will be too much of a compromise, and we'll see the issues continue in Stormont, where, you know, we simply can't pull government together because the DUP will not compromise. And I think they're completely right in their approach, which is putting the people of Northern Ireland first. But obviously there is that issue to overcome, where you have, you know, not much legislation happening in Northern Ireland.
You see, I'm wondering how much store do we put by anything Boris Johnson says on this, on the basis that he was at the helm when the Northern Ireland Protocol was signed, clearly with the intention of not sticking to it. I mean that in itself was, whether you like Boris Johnson or not, that move in itself was disingenuous at the time, and that has led us to this mess, hasn't it?
Yeah, particularly, I believe, in the issue of no compromise, because we are getting to the point now where there is no time for compromise because we've made too many compromises already. So I perfectly understand the unionist position, which is saying, look, we've been, you know, fiddle-faddled around for however long it is now. We actually need to see a solution that is going to be set in stone and not going to change, because the worst thing for trade is change. You know, you're missing out on things because nobody quite knows what the law's going to be tomorrow. I mean, that's just a terrible state of affairs, not to mention the constitutional issue. You know, the politicians need to get a grip on how this is affecting people on the ground. This isn't about, you know, high-level, you know, machinations ahead of the run in 2024 and all the rest of it. This is about real-world solutions, regardless of which government is in. They need to be getting on the ground in Northern Ireland. You know, where's the Prime Minister been? Why is he not out there talking to people, you know, finding out more about what's actually going on the ground? You know, if he wants to make a huge impact and regain some of the trust, he needs to be doing that.
OK, Joseph, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. If you've got a view on that, we'd love to hear from you, particularly if you're in Northern Ireland. How has all this affected you? Has it affected your weekly shop? And we know things have actually been quite different in Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the country, in a way, with indeed with some of the pricing issues as well, as a result of the sort of cost of getting goods from mainland UK into Northern Ireland and all the rest of it. Has had a negative impact.
And getting some medicines as well has been difficult in Northern Ireland. So, yes, if you are watching or listening to us in Northern Ireland, do let us know what you think about the prospect of a Brexit deal and potentially what it means for you as well. Lots of you getting in touch this morning. I'm going to share some of them with you now. Maxine says, hi, Stephen and Ellie, great show, great team to help me wake up on a Saturday morning. And Belinda is with you, Stephen.
Oh, is she?
She's having porridge.
Good for you, Belinda.
With honey. So she's allowing herself a sweet treat on a Saturday. She's getting ready to walk Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, well, you need a bit of extra energy. That'll keep you going.
Porridge is a good shout.
Gary. Oh, Gary.
Gary.
Says, I'm watching you this morning as someone tried to break into my house at 5:30.
Oh,
I am so sorry. Fortunately, my camera alerted me and the police had arrived by 6 a.m. Well done, Northumbria Police.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, well done to though, because that's just horrific.
Quick response time.
That
Gary, I hope you're okay.
We showed you Maggie May earlier on. Jack is a little dog. We said we don't know what she is, but very cute. Jackie says she's a Lhasa Apso dog.
I've never heard of that breed, have you?
I've never heard of that. But talking of dogs...
Yes.
Nana Chrissy says, good morning, you two. I agree the news is heavy and can be intense, so I thought this might brighten you and the viewers up. My son and his partner are celebrating 5 years together and have just adopted a puppy. Her name is Bella.
Yeah.
And she's a... There
Oh,
she is. A 9-week-old miniature dachshund. They're totally besotted with her. She is... Describe her, Eddie.
She is so cute. She looks like a blonde dachshund with long, fluffy ears, and she's tiny, really, really small. And she's got a long, fluffy tail as well. She's very, very sweet. And she's asleep in this photo and all curled up in a ball. Very, very cute.
Very cute. If you're listening on the radio, you might want to download the app or whatever, have a little rewind to 9 minutes past 7, because it's worth it. She's very, very cute. Thank you for that. Keep your thoughts coming through to us. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
OK, let's bring you up to date with other stories that are going on today. And Volodymyr Zelensky says he plans to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping after Beijing yesterday set out a peace plan for the war. Ukraine's president didn't say when the meeting might happen, but told a news conference in Kyiv that it would be beneficial for both countries and for the security in the world. But US President Joe Biden told ABC News the proposal only benefits Russia.
Detectives investigated the attempted murder of a former police officer in Omagh in County Tyrone, have made a 5th arrest. A Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell in a critical condition after being shot outside a sports centre on Wednesday. Police in Northern Ireland say they're treating it as terrorist-related, with the new IRA, as they're known, being their main line of inquiry.
Hundreds of people will protest against the privatisation of the NHS in Westminster later today. Organisers want to emphasise avoidable deaths in the health service. The campaign group We Own It says the government wastes money on privatisation, diverting much-needed resources away from the NHS.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more, should we, this morning? Because, of course, there's been concern about privatisation of parts of the NHS from some people for a long time. And then, of course, there's all the problems with the unions at the moment and the strikes that are ongoing. We mentioned the protests today are being organised by the We Own It organisation. And their director, Kat Hobbs, joins us now from Oxford. Good morning to you. It's nice to see you. Why is privatisation causing such a concern for you at the moment?
So I think there's so many issues with our NHS, but the main ones are cuts and privatisation. And the reason we're campaigning today is because an Oxford University study has shown that outsourcing NHS services actually leads to more deaths of patients. So that's an unacceptable situation. And what we're saying to politicians is you need to reinstate our NHS as a fully public service, and you need to fund it properly. That's what people in this country want to see. We're not going to accept a situation where, bit by bit, our NHS is being handed out piecemeal to companies whose main purpose is to make a profit rather than caring for patients.
I mean, isn't privatisation inevitable, though, when you look at the patient backlog? I mean, 7.2 million on the waiting list at the moment, 3 million of them waiting 16 weeks for treatment. I mean, you listed there that the NHS has got its issues, but it's on its knees, isn't it? Doesn't it need private outsourcing to get through those number of patients that desperately need help?
You're absolutely right that it's on its knees. The solution is to fund it properly. So we've done some polling that's coming out next week that shows that what people want is for the government to put money into our NHS, actually invest in our NHS, rather than diverting resources into the private sector. Right now, we have hospitals and NHS facilities that are literally crumbling and not fit for purpose because the government has failed to put money into the NHS over more than a decade. And the actual consequences of that is that people have died. And what that means now is that we're in such a situation that people, if they can afford it, instead of waiting, they're often choosing to go private, but that's a very bad situation to be in, and it's not necessary. It's a political choice. The government needs to fund the NHS properly, and then it wouldn't need to be even talking about the private sector.
Well, yeah, but let's be honest, and I can't quote exactly what the latest figures are because they keep changing and, frankly, they keep going up, but it's somewhere in the region of £180 billion a year now that the NHS is getting. The whole idea of just throwing more money at it has been debunked, hasn't it, now? I mean, even the Labour Party has said, you know, that the NHS needs, you know, wide-scale reform.
I think that's being pushed by people with a very specific agenda. And when you look at the links that many... No, I think many of our politicians have links to private healthcare companies that have benefited, and they've benefited during the pandemic, and they're benefiting now. And so what we have done is we've wasted money in this country on private companies. For example, if you look at during the pandemic, the money that was spent on test and trace, which was a private operation, was a complete waste of money, whereas the NHS did an amazing job vaccinating people. So we have to stop assuming that the private sector is any kind of answer. It just isn't. Our NHS back in 2012 was world-leading, world-beating. And what's happened since then is that this Conservative government has undermined it bit by bit, and it's failed to look after staff. It's failed to plan for the staff that the NHS needs. It's not giving them the conditions that they need and the pay that they need. And at the same time, it's bringing in the private sector through the back door. So the Oxford University study that we're highlighting today in Parliament Square shows that that outsourcing that's been brought in since 2012, that's been increased since 2012, has literally led to deaths of patients. It's literally killed people. That's an unacceptable situation. We don't want to be like America. We don't want to have a situation where we have private companies driven by profit, driven by cost cutting, driven by cherry picking of the services that they want to provide, instead of an NHS that works absolutely brilliantly when it is properly funded, when it is in public hands.
Yeah, but to be fair, it's Wes Streeting, the shadow health secretary, who is coming up with the more radical plans for the future of the NHS than the Conservatives are.
Well, I think what we're saying to Wes Streeting and to Steve Barclay and to all politicians is the real solutions here are, yes, of course, workforce planning, but also we need to reinstate our NHS as a fully public service. That's what the public want to see. That's what Conservative voters want to see, not just Labour voters. All across this country, the NHS is something that brings people together. We know that it works when it's properly funded. We can rely on it, but it has to be in public hands. It just doesn't work when it's privatised and outsourced. And actually, we can't just talk about it being a neutral thing, whether to involve the private sector. It's not neutral, and that's what we're saying today. In fact, it works so badly that it's led to deaths of patients.
I mean, Kat, you're talking about funding for the NHS. You want to see more funding. But do you accept that there also needs to be a serious look at the way that the NHS spends its money as well? I mean, just last year, £40 million was spent a year on diversity staff. I mean, you're talking about wanting to pay nurses more. I mean, shouldn't that be looked at, the way that the NHS spends the money that it's given?
So in 2012, the NHS was the most efficient healthcare system in the world. And we need to be focusing on that and focusing on the big picture issues here, which is not enough staff. You know, right now, ambulances, strikes because staff aren't being paid enough. They're working in desperate conditions. It's a terrible situation. And I think rather than getting diverted by questions like that, we need to focus on the big issues. Fund our NHS properly, reinstate it as a fully public service, stop outsourcing it to private companies who don't have the interests of patients at their heart because they're supposed to focus on their shareholders. That's their job.
Yeah, OK, but you didn't answer the question there about things like diversity officers.
Yeah, I'm not really very interested in that question, if I'm honest. I'm interested in the big picture questions.
Yeah, hold on a minute, because you've made your point very, very clearly. But in terms of, £40 million a year on diversity officers, it isn't the question from Ellie actually was, doesn't the NHS need to spend its money better? That's actually a fair question, isn't it?
we're talking about the billions that are needed to provide healthcare. That's the scale of the situation.
Yeah, you
I
get
don't know about
180 billion at the minute.
But what I want to focus on is when you look at the deaths from cuts and when you look at the deaths from privatisation, those are all avoidable deaths that are being driven by political decisions to undermine our NHS and to open it up to private healthcare interests that are often linked up with politicians. And that's the issue we have to focus on. That's the issue we have to do something about. And that's the issue that people at home actually care about. When you ring up 999, when you have a health issue, when you break your arm, when you have a mental health problem, when you have cancer, is the NHS there for you? It could be, it should be, it has been in the past, but staff are struggling right now, and they're struggling because the NHS doesn't have the funding it needs and because government is deliberately privatising the NHS.
Yeah, we're out of time, really. But I've got to say, I'm just wondering why you don't want to look as if you want the NHS to be run in a more efficient manner.
Oh, I absolutely do. I don't work in the NHS. I'm not, a manager within the NHS. I'm not somebody who does that kind of work. I'm somebody who wants to stand up for patients, and our organisation, we own it. We want to stand up for the majority of people in this country who want the NHS to actually be able to work for patients. And that means government policies have to change. Government policies have to be working for the NHS, working for patients, working for staff.
Okay. Kat, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Your views on that will be very welcome this morning. GB Views at gbnews.uk. I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that the NHS needs to be more efficient. Right? And I think £40 million on diversity officers. I mean, I know that's just one that we've picked out.
Yeah, but there will be many in terms of managerial positions. That's just one aspect, and it's a big budget, as you say, 180 billion. That's the latest figures from December. So I
don't know. We see amidst all of that. I mean, in terms of private healthcare and the. I mean, yes, if it's a private company, obviously there's an argument to say if it's a private company, then they want to make profit. Absolutely. But again, the counter-argument to that is, well, because they want to make profit, they then run things more efficiently. And it's not making a profit, which is a problem with nationalised industry, where they become less efficient because they don't have to even consider a profit. And so it's balancing those two things up, isn't it? I mean, that's always been the issue between privatisation and nationalisation.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point there about even the Labour Party. I mean, Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting have both spoken about bringing in private doctors to help to clear waiting lists. I mean, even the Labour Party is saying it now. Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, it's now been more than a year since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and there is still no clear end in sight.
Well, yesterday, Britain held a minute's silence in honour of the many thousands who've died since the conflict began, whilst Ukraine's allies reaffirmed their commitment to helping the country towards victory over Russia.
Well, our reporter Will Hollis has been following events around the one-year anniversary.
It was the siren that signalled the coming change. In a matter of hours, Russia's invasion turned millions of Ukrainians into refugees and transformed tens of thousands of civilians into soldiers. President Zelensky, once a comedian, now a celebrated war leader. We will defeat all threats, he says 1 year on, speaking to his nation. He describes it as a year of bravery and hope, a year of invincibility. The war in the East has been ongoing since 2014, but few believed Russia would launch a full-scale invasion of its neighbour, and in turn that Ukraine could hold out for so long. Since then, 8,000 Ukrainian civilians have died. The true number will be much higher. From the fighting, more than 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers are thought to have been killed. Russian losses could be twice as many. In Britain, the war has been marked with silence. From the start of the invasion, the UK has stood beside its Ukrainian ally. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak welcomed his counterpart in recent weeks. Yesterday, at the Ukrainian Catholic Church in London, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson lighted candles. Meanwhile, King Charles, who met President Zelensky on his visit, said that Ukrainians have endured unimaginable suffering during the war, while applauding support from Britain and its allies. At times symbolic, this street in London renamed Kyiv Road, but weapons are the true signifier of commitment. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki confirmed delivery of the Leopard 2 tanks his country pledged to the cause.
It's not only documents.
Not only documents. Real tanks are also there.
We have freedom. Give us wings to protect it.
Ukraine asks for jets, but Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says it's not as simple as handing them over, but there are other options.
If there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected.
Putin's so-called special military operation, for the most part, has failed. Yet he has mobilised his homeland and has resources for a long war. His friends in China have suggested a constructive ceasefire and de-escalation. It's unknown if the Russian leader is listening. But the world is watching, wondering what might happen next. Will Hollis, GB News.
Incredibly poignant to see that.
No, I was just about to say exactly the same word. Yeah, really moving, those images there.
Now, loads of you getting in touch on the clean air zone that Sheffield's bringing in on Monday. Kaz, which is interesting because it's about the Kaz charge, as it's known. I don't know if
maybe it wasn't Kaz.
Maybe it's not Kaz, but whoever you are. Can anyone please tell me what makes the air any cleaner for charging vehicles to enter a clean air zone? I suppose the idea is it's meant to disrupt people from going, isn't it? But then that's when the businesses start to fail. Russell says perhaps Sheffield Council will use the revenue raised to clean up the area as well as the pollution.
And Con says, I live in Sheffield and this new scheme is just another ridiculous tax by the left-wing woke council. The average wage in Sheffield is from minimum wages. And that's the point I was saying earlier. I mean, I've been speaking to families here in London with the ULEZ charge that's looking to expand in September. They're having to buy new cars in the middle of a cost of living crisis, cars that, don't apply that ULEZ charge. I mean, it's really hard for families out there.
George says the problem with the denizens of local councils is they don't understand the concept of public service. They're appointed to their positions by the public to facilitate movement around their area, not to be crusaders for net zero. Yeah, I get you. I don't know. But I don't know if I agree with you or not on that, George. I have to think about it, really.
Well, it's certainly got lots of you talking.
Right.
Yeah, it's certainly got lots of you talking this morning. Do keep those views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We do love to hear from you, don't we?
We do indeed. And talking of cars, actually, coming up, we're going to be taking a look at Britain's most stolen cars. We're going to be talking to an expert to give us advice on how to protect your motor.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
7:30. Good morning to you, watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie. Apology for the sniffles. We're both. I'm a lot better than I was.
I'm worse, I think.
But we've got a constant supply of tissues down here because we're just always blowing our nose in the breaks.
And Stephen was just helping me apply my powder to my nose, so it was a lovely moment, wasn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Glad you're here. Actually, it was a big orange splodge.
She's terrible. She doesn't know what she's doing with makeup.
Yeah.
Not that I do.
We've got a very entertaining video. I'll put it on my Instagram.
Yes.
Stephen helping with my makeup. Anyway, we digress.
Yes, security experts are warning that a shortage in vehicle parts is making mainstream cars more tempting for thieves.
Yes,
spare parts, I guess.
Is it?
Well, it must be if it's something to do with that, yeah.
Oh, OK. Well, car theft numbers are at an all-time high, and last year there was a 300% increase in the number of shops closed by police. Chop shops.
Chop shops.
What's a chop shop?
Chop shops, where they chop the car up.
Oh, well, there you go.
Mm.
Like a crusher at a...
No, because they literally chop them into bits, and sometimes they do what's the bit where they cut a car in half and stick 2 other halves together? There's a word for it, which will come to me when we finish talking about it. Anyway,
probably when you get home later, yeah.
Keyless car theft is also growing rapidly, accounting for 93% of thefts. I'll tell you who'll know. Clive Wayne, who's head of police liaison at Tracker, joins us now. Morning to you, Clive. What is it when they cut a car in half and shove 2 different halves together? Twock. Oh, no, that's twocking is stealing a car, isn't it? Oh, I don't know.
Morning. I think it's commonly known as a cut and shut.
Cut and shut.
Thank you, Clive.
That's the one. I knew you'd know. Look, what is going on? Why are we seeing such an increase in thefts?
Well, you mentioned it. Since the COVID lockdowns have been lifted and free movement and travel across borders, etc., has opened up, we've seen a huge increase. In fact, we've seen a 21% increase in theft over the last 12 months. And not least due, as you mentioned, down to the increased value of all vehicles, including mainstream vehicles. New vehicles are difficult to get hold of. People are waiting up to 12 months for a new car. And that's risen the price for second-hand vehicles, but also the shortfall in vehicle parts has also increased the value. We've seen a 15% increase in all vehicles compared to 2019.
Most likely models to be stolen, Clive?
everything across the board, really. Historically, organised criminality targeted many of the more prestigious vehicles, such as Range Rovers, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, etc. And our sort of stats are heavily populated in those vehicles. But nationally, Ford Fiesta is the most stolen vehicle. Ford Focus is in the top 10. Vauxhall Corsa, VW Golf, Vauxhall Astra. So nothing's safe because everything is in scarce commodity now in terms of parts and in terms of vehicles themselves.
I mean, you would have thought that vehicle security had increased. I mean, certainly new cars, everything seems to have built-in immobilisers and heaven knows what. But it is our figures show 93% of all stolen cars now are keyless. Is this a bit of technology which is really failing then?
So the 93% is our stats, tracker internal stats. So of all the vehicles that were stolen and recovered last year in 2022, 93% of them were stolen without the keys present. So only 7% had the keys with them. And the irony is, in this day and age of high technology, it's probably easier to steal a car and quicker to steal a car now than it's ever been, because that technology is being reverse engineered by organised criminals.
So what can we do to protect our vehicles?
Well, ironically, in this day and age of high-tech vehicles, I would strongly advocate going back to the sorts of things we did many years ago in terms of traditional physical methods. So the likes of steering locks, crook locks, wheel locking mechanisms, concreted driveway posts, people being sensible at night, locking the car in a garage or a lock-gated environment, parking in well-lit areas, using a good CCTV system. All of these things will not ultimately stop theft if an organised criminal wants to take the vehicle, but often will displace criminality onto an easier target. I would also advocate a bona fide Thatcham-accredited tracking device, because whilst that won't stop anybody's vehicle from being stolen, it will give them the best possible chance of getting that vehicle recovered as quickly as possible and intact.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Clive, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It's a worry. It is a worry. Yeah. Twocking is taking without consent.
Taking without consent, there you go.
Now,
I was going to ask about, I've heard that you need to keep your keys in the fridge if it's a keyless vehicle. No. Keys in the fridge or keys in the microwave or something. And that means that thieves can't infiltrate the signal.
They can't can't stimulate the key into giving it signal out, sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it depends if you're living in a small flat or something, where they can sort of get through scan it through the walls or whatever.
But it is interesting, isn't it? It's that drive for, pardon the pun, but it's the drive for electric vehicles and keyless cars, and it's like the infrastructure isn't quite there yet. The technology isn't quite there yet to keep those cars safe.
A lot of the new cars are about sort of fingerprints and codes on the door and things. A lot of them, maybe that's... But I don't know if that's more secure or not. I just don't know. But anyway, it's something we need to... Just be careful is the answer. Just be careful. And if you can double lock... Sometimes even with the keyless ones, you can then double lock it afterwards so that you actually then have to press a button to open it. Maybe it's just what we need to do.
Yeah.
You lose the advantage of it being keyless.
Of it being keyless, yes.
But maybe that's the way forward.
But as Clive said, go old school. I mean, park in well-lit areas, park in safer streets if you can. And
steering wheel locks.
Steering wheel locks, yeah. We have to go old school.
Don't they?
They do.
Anyway, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've got the papers heading your way in just a few minutes.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already depressed.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It is 7:41, whether you're watching us on the TV, listening to us on the radio or on YouTube and wherever you are in the world, actually. Good morning to you.
Yeah.
This is Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Now it's time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is writer and journalist Andy Jones and the author Ella Whelan. Good morning to you both. Right, Ella, let's start with you. Something a little bit different from what we did last time, King Charles's coronation. Some more details in the Telegraph.
Yes, and all eyes now on the Queen consort, Camilla, who and what kind of gown she's going to wear. And even, people like me who aren't so much interested in, Republicans, I can still get very excited about dresses, about fashion. And this is interesting because Camilla has a relationship with Bruce Oldfield, who is one of the designers that's favoured by the royals and famously did a lot of work with the late Princess Diana. A lot of her gowns, and you'd think that would be a bit awkward, but I think these sort of royal courtiers sort of do the circuit for lots of different members of the household. But I just wanted to pick up on this because the Telegraph does a kind of story about Bruce Oldfield, and he actually has a really interesting background. So he was born to an Irish mother and a Jamaican father. He actually grew up in care for a lot of his early life, had a difficult early life. He said that he was sort of turfed out of foster home because he was badly behaved, in his own words, and opened up a shop, and then one of his foster carers taught him to sew, and that's how he got an interest in it. Really? Opened up a shop, and just by chance, he says, met Diana, and through that, the relationship with the royal family grew. So it's quite an interesting rags to riches show, and he's now about to. He actually, as one of the columns underneath by Bethan Holt explains, he's had some difficulty with his business in the last few years, but took a punt and created a studio in his home, and is now potentially making the dress for the Queen Consort, which will be a historic artefact. Actually, these kind of gowns will be, whether it's in the V&A or anything, there forever. So it's quite exciting.
Yeah, it will last. It will last forever and a day, which is quite nice. Meanwhile, the Mail is looking at the coronation as well, Andy, and looking at the King, Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex.
Yeah, from coronation dress to coronation mess. Well, apparently Prince Harry isn't going to set foot back in the UK until he's had an apology from King Charles and Prince William for the treatment of Meghan, the alleged leaking of stories to curry favour with the press, etc., etc. Meghan was mistreated. I don't know whether there's an apology due for Prince William throwing Harry onto a dog bowl or whatever other nonsense was in the spare novel. And, yeah, apparently he's not coming unless he gets an apology. There's lots of excitable royal source quotes about it's going to take more than a gold-plated envelope to get Harry here, and Prince William won't even gaze upon Harry at the ceremony and all this sort of stuff. Of course, Meghan herself is, we're here, unlikely to attend because it's going to be on the same weekend as Archie's 4th birthday, and also she's got the childcare needs with Lilibet, etc. This is going to run and run and run. We're going to have lots of royal source quotes.
Do we believe
lots
the
of
royal
innuendo.
sources? Because, I mean, the royal source quotes last week were saying Harry and Meghan were going to sue South Park over all the business going on, and then they've come out and said this is absolute rubbish.
There are royal commentators that I believe and there's others that I don't. I think it's very easy as a journalist to say, oh, there's a royal source. I mean, is that somebody that's literally changing the bed sheets? Is that someone that's a personal confidant? Is that somebody that's once stood outside Buckingham Palace? Royal sources are a very vague outline, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And would they want Harry here? I mean, that's the question as well, isn't it? I mean,
At least the invitation's been extended.
Yeah, but I mean, if we're talking about history and just an incredible event for the UK, to then have Harry there, would that not overshadow?
I think it poses far more questions if he doesn't come. I think if Harry and Meghan come and there's going to be lots of body language experts spying on them, there's inevitably a picture of them throughout that will appear at some point during the day and them looking miserable and slightly upset. But I think actually if Harry doesn't come at all, you have this position of it's a huge snub that the royal family couldn't unite for this great occasion. You've only got to stand there and smile and look sort of...
I sort of think where is the media, I have to say, I think we take a lot of responsibility for it. Because it is, we're the ones that employ the body experts and the lip readers and all the rest of it. Nice people as they are, no offence, but, it's, we just need to ignore it. If Harry comes, just let him come, and we just need to ignore it. Let him get on with it. But, of course, that won't happen because, the media's its own beast, isn't it? Let's have a look at homegrown food. We need to get back to our root veg.
Yes.
That's The Guardian.
Well, just because we were talking about turnips in the last time we did the paper review, I thought I'd pick this out, which is... The interesting thing about this is, particularly papers like The Guardian, but others are sort of very keen on saying that we need to grow our own, be sustainable. And I think lots of people who have a garden, which is not everyone, I certainly never did, it's a nice thing to do. But one of the reason why I wanted to pick this out is that they do a sort of interview with Guy Singh-Watson, who runs Riverford Vegetable Box Company, which is like a subscription vegetable box company. Not only does he say that he wouldn't inflict winter turnips on our customers because winter turnips are much nastier and tougher than they are in the summer, but he also points out that something that's sort of not very often mentioned, which is that gardening in a kind of small, whether it's in your back garden or sort of small-scale farming, is incredibly intensive in terms of the kind of fossil fuels it uses up. It's actually not very... You think green fingers gardening, very... No, but the only reason I'm saying it is because
in terms of what, though?
You have to buy a huge amount of fertiliser.
No, you don't.
I tell you, you do...
We grew all our own veg.
But where was that?
Back in the day, up in the north.
Yeah, well, if you've got a scabby little patch of London sort of... then you need to feed it with a lot of stuff. But the point I wanted to make is that there's, instead of... we need to have a kind of a national plan for food security, which takes into account efficiency and all that kind of stuff. Simply expecting people to grow their own sort of, scabby old carrots and beetroot in their back garden and survive on that isn't going to do, really.
Would you grow your own, Andy?
Do you know what? I can't now where I've moved to, but when I previously had a garden, I loved growing my own tomatoes, blueberries, all sorts. I love showing off, going into the garden, getting some, washing them, and going, oh, look at this lovely salad I've grown. And it's really great. It's a really meditative, enjoyable thing.
Yeah.
Planting, because you're not looking in front of a screen. You're not thinking of anything else. Planting, digging, pulling a few weeds out.
I don't like worms, though.
You don't eat the worms.
You never know.
You just take them off.
We're going that way.
We've got... Oh, don't. Don't. I'm sure they're very nutritious. We've got to leave it there. We'll catch up with you both a little bit later on. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And let's bring you up to date with what else is going on today. And the Prime Minister has vowed to keep working towards securing a post-Brexit trade deal after plans for an in-person meeting with the European Commission President has been called off. Number 10 says further talks on the Northern Ireland Protocol would take place within the coming days.
The Defence Secretary says he's confident the troubled £5.5 billion programme to build new tanks has turned a corner. The project to build nearly 600 Ajax fighting vehicles has had real criticism for running for nearly 13 years without yet deploying a single usable tank.
Thousands of displaced Ukrainians are being given the chance to go to the Eurovision Song Contest being hosted in the UK. Around 3,000 tickets will be made available to Ukrainians who are currently living in the UK because of the war. Liverpool has been chosen to host on behalf of Ukraine, who won last year's competition.
Now, if you just can't get enough of the one ring to rule them all, you may be pleased to know that Warner Brothers have confirmed there's a new series of Lord of the Rings films in the works.
Well, one woman who has all the details is our friend and showbiz reporter Stephanie Tetchy.
Good morning, Ellie and Stevie. It's dancing with me.
You look fabulous.
Thank you. I thought I'd be red hot this morning.
You are
red hot on the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, now, go on.
Yeah,
what's
so
happening then?
Cinema Land is going back to Middle Earth. So Warner Brothers Chief Executive David Zaslav on Thursday confirmed that a deal has been brokered, that there will be several Lord of the Ring films that will be coming out, obviously based on J.R.R. Tolkien's books. The last time we saw it in the cinema was the hit The Hobbit spin-off in 2014, which was a prequel to The Lord of the Rings. But The Lord of the Rings actually made its debut in cinemas in 2001, so we're talking about that long ago, and it's considered very much a landmark in cinema history. And, you know, those films went on to bank $2.4 billion worldwide, and it made stars out of people such as Elijah Wood, Kate Blanchett, Sir Ian McKellen's in it. So this new series is going to be produced by New Line, who is Warner Brothers production house. So it's hoping it's going to be in line with the same as Peter Jackson, who directed the films originally between 2001 and 2003. So we're hoping it's going to have the same magic. But, you know, from what I've seen online, it seems a lot of fans aren't excited as I thought they would be.
Well, because presumably they're making up the story. There's that old phrase, isn't there? There are two types of people.
Yeah.
Those who've read Lord of the Rings and those who haven't. And I made a point of reading it before the first film. It's a thick book.
Were you impressed with the films?
Yeah, I thought the films were sensational.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a worry, hasn't there, when they're inventing a brand new landscape?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of general consensus with fans, because they're like, you know, it's not going to be able to top that trilogy that Peter Jackson brought to the cinemas, and usually fans are usually disappointed when you bring a new spin-off in it, and it'll be new characters and then obviously new people who will be acting it. So whether they can, you know, live up to it, who knows? But it was only last year we saw them bring back the TV spin-off, The Power of the Rings, on Amazon, and that was great. You know, it's been dubbed the most expensive TV show. It cost £800 million, and they're already at the moment filming season 2 for it.
But that didn't go down very well with the fans either, did it?
I know. I think Lord of the Rings, when it comes to fantasy dramas, I think fans are very protective of the narrative and how it's brought to life, where I think for producers it's very much a money-making thing. As I said, those trilogy of films banked $2.4 billion, so there is that demand there. And the producers very much feel there's much that can be told with Middle Earth. Like, you can go far more deeper into the plot with it.
Yeah.
Do we know when these are due?
No, I think because this is like hot on the news, I think we're going to have at least another 2-3 year wait.
Yeah, because I mean, they're going to have to keep the production value extremely
very high, and it's the casting as well. The casting is the big thing. So I think over the next few years, months even, we'll be hearing more about the production and more who will be starring in it. But I think it'll be good to introduce it to a new generation of fans because every weekend when I'm on Sky, there's always a Lord of the Rings film on. So I think people have seen the old stuff, so maybe there is room for the new.
Remake, and with technology now.
So it'll be quite
impressive.
Quite advanced. But
I'm just slightly concerned that it's that 21 years ago since the first one.
I know, it feels like yesterday. It really does. But, you know, The Return of the King, which was the last of the trilogy, I think it famously won, like, all 11 of its Academy Awards. So it was ahead of its time.
It was,
Big boots to fill.
Lovely stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Steph. Catch you later on. Don't go anywhere. All the top stories of the day heading your way, including the latest on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Will we get a big announcement on Monday? We'll tell you more after the weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. This weekend it's dry and settled. There will be some sunshine, where those skies remain clear, a return of frost at night too. Looking at the pressure pattern, high pressure dominates right through the weekend and actually much of next week too, keeping all the weather systems behind me out in the Atlantic. Lots of dry and settled weather to come. So this morning, it's a dry start for many, frosty start in places, but plenty of sunshine. Just cloudier skies across the north and the east. Keen northerly breeze at first will bring in showers, this easing as we head through into the afternoon. Lots of places staying dry, the best of the sunshine holding on across parts of Northern Ireland, perhaps western Scotland, but most places dry with some bright spells. Temperatures a little lower than recent days, 6 to 9 Celsius, but that's where we should be for the time of year. Perhaps still feeling chilly along some eastern coast with that northerly breeze. Into the evening time, we'll see the clouds starting to melt away, longer, clearer periods developing, though there's still the risk of a few showers coming in off the North Sea down some eastern coasts. Under the clearest skies for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps Wales and southwest England, -2 to -4 Celsius. So a frost developing here. Patchier further east where we see a little bit more cloud. So into Sunday, cloudy across some eastern areas to start. The risk still of a few showers coming through from the North Sea. Best of the sunshine across the northwest, but even here we'll see the cloud move and bubble up as we go into the afternoon. Elsewhere across England and Wales, a lot of cloud into the afternoon, but there will be some bright or sunny spells. The southeast of England seeing the highest temperatures around 9 Celsius in any sunshine. So overall temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius around average for the time of year. Very little change as we go into next week. At the start of next week, high pressure holding on. A lot of cloud around, but there'll be some sunny spells, lots of dry weather, and temperatures still around average. See you again soon.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Rishi Sunak is poised to announce a Northern Ireland Protocol deal as early as Monday.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Saturday, the 25th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
Now, these are your top stories this morning, and the Prime Minister reportedly preparing to reveal a new Brexit deal after Downing Street claimed he's gained last-minute concessions from Brussels. Cabinet ministers said to be on alert for a conference call this weekend. And Westminster is braced for then a new Northern Ireland Protocol announcement.
Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. A minute's silence was held in the UK, led by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, to pay tribute to Ukrainians everywhere. It comes as the UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace ruled out sending RAF Typhoon jets to the front line.
China's called for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, setting out a 12-point plan to bring the conflict to a close. It's after the US Secretary of State claimed the country was considering supplying weapons and ammunition to Moscow, though that has been denied by Beijing.
And a British vicar, who is only ordained priest to compete in international motorsport, is on course to race at one of the world's biggest later this year.
Yeah, we're going to talk to him a little bit later on. The Racing Reverend.
The Racing Reverend, Racing Rev.
Yeah.
Very much looking forward to that one.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him.
Why not?
As ever, you can join in any of our discussions this morning by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, and lots of you have been doing so keep them coming in.
Let's start then with the news that Conservative MPs have been told to be in Parliament on Monday, and that's suggesting the Prime Minister could be set to reveal a new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Well, it will be no mean feat as he faces opposition from both the DUP and his own party, with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson leading the charge to defend his protocol bill. Well, let's speak now to political reporter Catherine Forster, who's in the studio with us now. Catherine, good morning to you. So, positive sounds, really, about talks intensifying. We're hearing about MPs being recalled into Westminster tomorrow, a three-line whip. What do you make of this? Do you think this could be a new deal?
I suspect it could, but important to say we're talking about Brexit and we're talking about Northern Ireland. So it's always tortuous, it's never simple, and people always get upset. But it does sound like, and we were here last week and it didn't happen, it does sound like Rishi Sunak has agreed a deal with the EU. It sounds like it will meet most of the Democratic Unionist Party's 7 tests, although crucially possibly not all. It sounds like checks on goods going into Northern Ireland, staying in Northern Ireland, will go. Those have been causing huge problems for businesses. It sounds like the role of the European Court of Justice, which is really the key remaining sticking point, will be significantly reduced, and the Irish courts will only escalate to the ECJ in the last possible scenario, and that Northern Ireland Assembly and UK government will have the right to be consulted on new EU laws that would affect them. But will it be enough? Will it be enough to satisfy the DUP and, crucially, the ERG? Now, Rishi Sunak doesn't have to get the DUP to say, we're happy with this, but what he needs is for them not to actively oppose it.
Well, but if they're not happy with it, then the Northern Ireland Assembly won't restart.
Exactly.
Basically,
it won't.
So in a way, he has got to get their approval.
He's got to get them to be happy enough that yeah, this is it. If they're not happy, he can get this deal through, but that may not restore power sharing in the province, and that is very serious for the people of Northern Ireland who've effectively got no government for a long period of time. So, you know, they're trying to square this circle that, since the Brexit vote, has been very clear. The difficult part was always going to be, how do you have a sort of hard Brexit? How do we diverge from EU rules and regulations while not putting a hard border on the island of Ireland? And Boris Johnson's answer was, we effectively put a border down the Irish Sea. But the hope was, let's not forget, Boris Johnson agreed the deal that has caused so many problems, but he did it because he needed to get something over the line. He wanted to say, let's get Brexit done, to get that 80-seat majority. They hoped, him and David Frost, that the EU wouldn't enforce it very harshly, that there'd be a bit of a fudge, that they'd turn a blind eye, and that hasn't happened.
No. I mean, it would be nonsensical, wouldn't it, if their announcement is made on Monday and parties like the DUP haven't already been, not only briefed on it, but actually consulted on this. Because there's no point having an announcement saying we've achieved X, Y and Z if the DUP then stand up and say, well, we're not happy with any of this.
Well, that seems to be what the delay has been in the last week, that basically Rishi Sunak and the EU had agreed this amongst themselves, then went to run it by the DUP and saying, oh, we've met your 7 tests. And the DUP were like, well, actually, no, you haven't. So there's been lots and lots of back and forth. But I mean, when Boris Johnson's when Brexit was done, so to speak, and that protocol was announced, the DUP were never in favour of it. They sort of went along with power sharing for a bit. They gave it the benefit of the doubt. And then when it clearly wasn't working, was causing huge problems, they then pulled out of power sharing. So it's very difficult, but clearly something needs to change because it has caused huge problems in Northern Ireland. And that's also totally irrespective of the civil war that might be about to break out in the Conservative Party if the ERG and the DUP are not happy, which they may well not be.
Well, that's what I was just about to ask you about, actually, because 2 characters we'll be watching this very closely will be Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and they could be very critical of Rishi Sunak's handling of all of this. How likely do you think this could be a backbench rebellion?
I think it's very dangerous for Rishi Sunak. Now, pardon me, clearly irrespective of the issue, both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson don't like the fact that Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister. They think they were unfairly removed. They wish they were still in the job. And they are frankly going to say whatever they like. Boris Johnson is very keen to be back as Prime Minister. And this is an excellent way of causing major trouble. And he can and he potentially will cause major trouble.
But Rishi Sunak will be extremely aware of that. And as you say, there's no point announcing something that hasn't already been given the nod from the key parties in all of this on Monday. So in effect, if former Prime Ministers kick off about something which appears to have got approval and could well work, they're going to have egg on their faces, aren't they? I mean, they've got to play it fairly carefully.
It all hangs really on the DUP, doesn't it? Because if the DUP are OK with it, the ERG and everybody else will fall into line. So, I mean, you know, we're hearing, and we'll probably know on Monday, is Rishi Sunak just going to put it out there and basically say, take it or leave it? That's very high risk. But at the same time, the longer this drags on, people are sick of it. I mean, even people in Westminster are sick of it. Lots of people in Northern Ireland just want it to be sorted. So it's watch this space. Watch this space.
It's gonna be interesting.
Can I just say one more thing? Yeah. Boris Johnson saying, you know, the other day coming out and saying, oh, let's go with my Brexit Northern Ireland Protocol bill. That's the one to go for. That's the deal. All that's doing is basically putting in the bin the protocol that he agreed, and that in itself would create a whole other set of problems. Plus, it's probably going to be judged illegal, so it's very tricky. There's nothing easy about any of this.
No,
very
Let me know. We need to get Arlene Foster on the phone, don't we? Tell us what she's
thought them out.
Well, honestly, you know, it's why it's fascinating working with someone like Arlene, is it? Because this is the minutiae of this is so extraordinary.
Yeah.
That it's the people in Northern Ireland and the people who run Northern Ireland who understand every little bit of this. Which the rest of us, I think, or certainly I just don't speak for you two. Me, I struggle to get my head around.
Yeah.
So.
Do you know of any whispers? Sorry, last question. And do you know? Have you heard any whispers of meetings between the DUP and the government at all this weekend, or is it?
Well, there have been a lot of talks, and last week, when we thought there was going to be a deal last weekend, there'd been a secret 2-hour meeting with Rishi Sunak and the DUP the night before that only came to light sort of after the event. So there has been lots of chatting, but also Boris Johnson has also been doing lots of chatting.
Yes. Interesting. OK, Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will keep you fully informed, of course. I mean, on Monday, if we do get that announcement, you'll get all the analysis here on GB News, as you know. It's 8:10. Let's bring you up to date with some of the other headlines this morning.
And Volodymyr Zelensky says he plans to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping after Beijing yesterday set out a peace plan for the war. Ukraine's president didn't say when the meeting might happen, but told a news conference in Kyiv that it would be beneficial for both countries and for security in the world. But US President Joe Biden told ABC News the proposal only benefits Russia.
Detectives investigating the attempted murder of an officer in Omagh in County Tyrone have made a 5th arrest. DCI John Caldwell is in a critical condition after being shot outside a sports centre on Wednesday. Police in Northern Ireland say they're treating it as terrorist-related. The new IRA is their main line of inquiry.
Hundreds of people will protest against the privatisation of the NHS in Westminster later today. The organisers want to emphasise avoidable deaths in the health service. The campaign group We Own It says the government wastes money on privatisation, diverting much-needed resources away from the NHS.
And if you were with us last hour, we spoke to the director of We Own It about those protests and all the money and all the rest of it. And a lot of you getting in touch, because what she didn't want to do, she said more money for the NHS, no privatisation. What she didn't want to do was answer any questions about the NHS being more efficient and saving money and all the rest of it. Max, hi Max, says we're funding the NHS to the tune of £217 billion. How much money do these NHS acolytes want? It clearly doesn't work in the current form. total overhaul is needed.
Yes, lots of you saying the same thing this morning. David says, I've heard the NHS is very well funded. It needs reform and better management. And Duncan says most people want the money, but it has to be used correctly. Pouring more water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom isn't the answer.
Yeah, and Monahan says, I'm a recently retired senior nurse. It does not need money. It needs ripping up and restarting.
It's always interesting, isn't it, when you actually hear from people within the NHS saying things like that. Yeah. And Gillian has made the point that we're talking about partially privatising the NHS. She says it already is, in big capital letters. That is the problem. People who can afford private health schemes are taking our NHS consultants away from you and me who can't afford to be treated privately. What should be happening is that all our NHS consultants and doctors should stay in the NHS and not be allowed to take private patients.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But, I mean, many of them would say what they're earning at the moment. I mean, some junior doctors can be on just over £1,000 a month. And they say they have to take on those private patients in order to pay their rent.
Stephen Kent says nothing in the NHS is going to improve unless it addresses its propensity to waste money. I was with a load of consultants, actually, this week. I was at a conference in Berlin, all to do with type 1 diabetes and sensors and all this amazing technology which there is. And one consultant, I heard having a conversation with a fellow consultant about the junior doctor strikes. And he said, I'm not against them striking. The one thing that really annoys me is when the spokespeople go on the news and say, well, we've had a 30% pay cut or 25% pay cut or whatever it was since 2007. And that's unacceptable and we need all that recouping. They want a 25% pay rise. He said in 2007, junior doctors were all in school. They haven't been junior doctors that long, so they haven't had a pay cut since 2007, because they were still at school. They're still in short trousers in 2007. Now, that's a consultant saying that, not me, but I thought it was an interesting point.
Very, very interesting. But do let us know. It's got you talking this morning. The NHS, does it need to spend its money better, or does it need more funding? Perhaps a combination of both. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Yeah. Now, let's turn our attention back to Ukraine, should we, where President Volodymyr Zelensky says he plans to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping after Beijing yesterday set out a 12-point peace plan to end the war.
But US President Joe Biden is warning the proposals only benefit Russia.
Well, let's talk to assistant editor at The Spectator, Cindy Yu. Morning to you.
Cindy.
So what do you make of this? Who's right? I mean, it's interesting. On an absolute surface level, I find it fascinating that President Zelensky is being the more diplomatic of the two here.
Well, Ukraine has to keep China on side because in the most immediate term, it doesn't want China to be completely siding with Russia in terms of supporting Russia with arms and resources and other things. But also in the medium and long term, who's the biggest investor in the world? China. You know, when it comes to building bridges, building roads, all of these things that we criticise it for building around the world, when it comes to Ukraine's rebuilding, it will be China and obviously the US as well, but China will be one of the biggest players in rebuilding that country, and Zelensky knows that.
I mean, we've got a copy of the 12-point peace plan here. Just on first reading, it seems quite reasonable. So, abandoning the Cold War mentality, ceasing hostilities, resuming peace talks, resolving the humanitarian crisis, protecting civilians and prisoners of war. I won't go through all of the points, but it does seem reasonable. But we have US President Joe Biden talking to ABC News in the US, saying that this can't be any good and it only benefits Putin.
Yeah, I agree with your initial reaction. You know, this is the first time since the war broke out a year ago that China has explicitly, and well, in quite so many words, said its own position, which is that it rejects this kind of erosion of sovereignty. So, hinted that is saying we reject the invasion of Ukraine, but it's saying also blaming the Cold War mentality, you know, this kind of NATO expansion, all of this stuff. So China's position is to not support Russia in terms of the principle, but it's actually saying, well, you made Russia do this. So it's a bit of both, and I can see why Biden is saying this helps Russia because China's calling for a ceasefire now, which means that the territory Russia has gained since last year, it lost some as well, but the ones that it has gained, it would keep to go into the peace talks. And I can see why the West thinks that is on Russia's side. At the same time, China will also be thinking, if you keep pushing Putin into a corner, if you keep escalating, if you start talking about Crimea, which is territory that Ukraine had lost before February last year, then what does that mean when it comes to Russia lashing out? You know, is that actually worse for the world in the long run? So I don't know what the answer to. I mean, if anyone did know the answer, I mean, that would be great. But I think it is interesting that the West has rejected this completely. Instead of saying something like, oh, you know, we welcome China's mediation efforts. Let's see them put their money where their mouth is and actually do something about this.
Well, I was going to say, because doesn't this? I mean, I know China is its own beast, right? So nothing's straightforward. However, the fact that they're coming up with this, doesn't that then almost draw a line under the possibility of them being a supplier to Russia in terms of munitions and things?
I think they're trying to say that. And they have rejected that rumour, which the American intelligence community put out last week. And the Americans are saying, well, we can show evidence. Let's see that. Let's see that evidence. But the Chinese side explicitly say, we're not doing this. Obviously, the Chinese side would say that if they were going to. But I think, as I say, you know, the position is difficult for China. It believes in territorial sovereignty. Its recent history means that it doesn't want to be invaded anymore, you know, so it wants to kind of, that's one of its central tenets of foreign policy. At the same time, it doesn't want to let the West win, as it were, and it has to bolster Russia up somehow.
It's quite difficult as well in terms of its saying it supports sovereign territories. How difficult a position does that put China in when it comes to Taiwan? I mean, is their argument there, to an extent, what Russia's argument was with Ukraine was, this is our territory, really?
Yes, although China has quite an easy get-out-of-jail clause on that one because Ukraine is internationally recognised as a country. You know, it's in the UN, it's in the WHO, all of these organisations. Taiwan has never been, and that's something that the People's Republic of China, mainland China, communist China, has made sure that it's never been recognised as a country. So that's what it would say.
Right.
That this is not actually a country.
Right.
which legally in international law is not.
Yeah, we're out of time. However, just on, does this give you cautious optimism or a little bit of?
Well, I'm not surprised that this is China's position. It is what they have been saying over the last year, although, as I say, not in so many words. What doesn't give me optimism is that that Biden and the EU have just kind of rejected it. I think they should have asked China to kind of prove it. If this is what you're saying, then why don't you bring Putin to the negotiating table, see what you can do? Yeah. But I think now the West's goals with this are so maximalist with wanting to bring back all of the lost territories that I think it's getting into a tricky territory.
OK. Cindy, I know we're going to see you a little bit later on, aren't you? But for now, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you know what? It's fascinating.
Really fascinating.
And I think when it comes to anything related to China as well, it's why you need to talk to someone who understands it, because it is such a complex beast and it works in a way that most of us in the West don't understand. It's a completely different political structure and their goals and ideals and ambitions, things. You've got to read them differently.
Yeah, you really do.
You do.
That's why it's so good to have Cindy. And Cindy, you have got a podcast, haven't you? If people are interested, let's give you a quick shout out.
It's called Chinese Whispers. It's fortnightly. It's free. You can get it wherever you get your podcast from.
There you go. If you are interested in this, and it is very, very interesting.
Yeah, it is worth.
Cindy's across it.
Worth getting your head around all these sort of things, I think. Now, of course, it has been more than a year since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and as we know, there is no end in sight as yet.
Well, yesterday, Britain held a minute's silence in honour of the many thousands of Ukrainians that have died since the conflict began, while Ukraine's allies reaffirmed their commitment to helping the country towards victory over its neighbour.
Well, our reporter Will Hollis has been following events around that one-year anniversary.
It was the siren that signalled the coming change. In a matter of hours, Russia's invasion turned millions of Ukrainians into refugees and transformed tens of thousands of civilians into soldiers. President Zelensky, once a comedian, now a celebrated war leader. We will defeat all threats, he says 1 year on, speaking to his nation. He describes it as a year of bravery and hope, a year of invincibility. The war in the East has been ongoing since 2014, but few believed Russia would launch a full-scale invasion of its neighbour, and in turn that Ukraine could hold out for so long. Since then, 8,000 Ukrainian civilians have died. The true number will be much higher. From the fighting, more than 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers are thought to have been killed, Russian losses could be twice as many. In Britain, the war has been marked with silence. From the start of the invasion, the UK has stood beside its Ukrainian ally. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak welcomed his counterpart in recent weeks. Yesterday, at the Ukrainian Catholic Church in London, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson lighted candles. Meanwhile, King Charles, who met President Zelensky on his visit, said that Ukrainians have endured unimaginable suffering during the war, while applauding support from Britain and its allies. At times symbolic, this street in London renamed Kyiv Road, but weapons are the true signifier of commitment. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki confirmed delivery of the Leopard 2 tanks his country pledged to the cause.
It's not only documents.
Not only documents. Real tanks are also there.
We have freedom. Give us wings to protect it.
Ukraine asks for jets, but Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says it's not as simple as handing them over, but there are other options.
If there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected.
Putin's so-called special military operation, for the most part, has failed. Yet he has mobilised his homeland and has resources for a long war. His friends in China have suggested a constructive ceasefire and de-escalation. It's unknown if the Russian leader is listening. But the world is watching, wondering what might happen next. Will Hollis, GB News.
Really poignant, isn't it? All those images.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. Look, don't go anywhere. We've got all the key stories, plus the sport heading your way in just a moment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
8:28 morning show. You're in there, darling.
Am I secure?
You are.
I feel like I'm poking out the side.
No, I put it on your loop there.
Thank you.
Look, she's covered in boxes and buttons at the back. She's like an automaton.
It's all on my... I don't know if you can see. It's all on my belt, but I'm kind of sticking out the side. Anyway.
It's falling apart. Your clip keeps falling off.
No. Stephen's trying to help me here, but
I am.
You know,
I should get paid extra for this.
I am a full-time job, aren't I?
You are. And who is Sarah Louise? Morning, Sarah Louise, who tweeted you, didn't she? Because she's watching with her 5-year-old grandson.
Yes.
Who says, "Oh, what a beautiful lady." But I don't like her voice.
Didn't like my voice.
No.
Oh, no.
It's why I wear my earpiece in this ear, because it muffles it out slightly on this
side. And that's why I wear mine on this side.
Yeah.
Got you back.
No, you've got a nice voice. Proper Essex girl, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, yeah. So sorry, I don't know, we don't have a name of the grandson, but I'm sorry that my voice is upsetting you this morning. But lots of other people saying very nice things about us, Stephen, so it's not all bad news.
It's not all bad news, no.
No. I'm watching great shows, says George. And Dipper, Bev Dipper, says great pairing. It's the only time that we watch GB News.
Oh, well, no, you should watch.
Very nice.
You should watch very more.
You should watch lots
more. Watch more. Lots more.
Much more to come as well.
Yeah, my voice is... I hate listening back to myself.
Yeah, so do I.
Oh, it's awful. Sounds awful.
Do you know what? I think that's good, though, in our jobs, because there's lots of people that probably do like the sound of their own voice.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Talking of which, here's Aidan McGee. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. I've had better intros.
I'm only joking. Let's talk boxing, should we?
Yeah, we've got a big event tonight. So it's not boxing as we know it, but it's two guys who, they haven't really come through the normal boxing routes. I'd say I'd call Jake Paul an influencer, a boxing influencer, if you like. He made his name on Vine. Tommy Fury made his name on Love Island, where he met Molly May, and they had a baby a few weeks ago called Bambi. But he did have a bit of boxing pedigree behind him anyway. He's the younger brother of Tyson Fury. But this fight takes place tonight, 9:30 in Saudi Arabia. The numbers are absolutely astonishing. And to bring us a bit more on it, I'm going to introduce the boxing broadcaster and writer, Gareth A. Davis, if we can speak to him. Gareth, if you wouldn't mind just shedding a bit of light on what's actually happening tonight, because I think all sports can learn a bit about the numbers they've generated and the fuss and the hype it's all built tonight.
Absolutely. Well, it's not tonight, it's tomorrow, I hasten to add. So you don't send everyone in the wrong direction. It is tomorrow night in Saudi Arabia. But you are the perfect triumvirate, the three of you. There's no doubt about that. What I want to say is, as you rightly say, this is a very unusual fight, but Jake Paul, with his 20 million YouTube subscribers, obviously he came from Disney originally, and has put himself in the boxing firmament into this milieu, and he's proved himself over and over again. As you rightly say, Tommy Fury is the half-brother, step-brother, or half-brother of Tyson Fury. And he's yet to prove himself in lots of ways. So it's a kind of novice boxing match tonight, watched by the world, with the Saudi royals and the red carpet of great boxers out there. Mike Tyson kind of dining with the Furies last night. It's grown legs, this fight. There's massive jeopardy for Tommy Fury in lots of ways. I'd say, Aidan, that he has to win for boxing tonight. They've both said they'll knock each other out. It's only an 8-round fight, but apart from the heavyweights and Saul Canelo Alvarez at the moment, the great Mexican, Jake Paul is probably the biggest draw in boxing. They'll earn, I don't know, 5 million Tommy Fury when the numbers are in tonight, 15 million when the numbers are in for Jake. It's a phenomenal event. But as you say, there's more influencers and YouTubers who've almost ambushed boxing, creating a parody of the sport. And this is right on the cusp between real boxing and that kind of misfits area that's now happening in the sport.
Just looking at the numbers, I mean, you mentioned the purchase and the fact that it's pay-per-view, the fact it's in Saudi in the first place. But tell me how the sport of boxing is feeling towards it. Is there a degree of snobbery at all?
I think there is. I think the purists are upset that there's more. You know, you've got KSI, the biggest influencer in the UK, has signed a 5-fight deal with DAZN, the sports broadcasters, and that's doing big numbers. Their last pay-per-view did 300,000 views. And you know, as a guy that's covered boxing for many, many years, the venue was full from 6:30. They were there till 11, queuing diligently around the street at the Wembley Arena. And it's, I think what it is, it's boxing until they step into the ring, certainly with those guys. These two, Jake Paul's got better and better. Tommy Fury has got jeopardy on his shoulders because he is the brother of Tyson Fury. Big John Fury is a big character in the sport. Their father is there. They both promised to knock each other out, as I say. So they're putting their words on the line. They've talked the talk. Tomorrow, they will have to walk the walk, and one man Zoe has got to go, unless they draw, and then we'll get another fight, which, you know, that's what happens in boxing.
And Gareth, sorry, did you want to come in first?
No, go on. I want to know who's going to win, Gareth.
Well, I've been on with you many times to talk boxing in the past, Stephen, and I think I've got a good record with you when you ask me.
Yeah.
I'm picking Tommy Fury for the stoppage around, I'd say round 5 or 6. But it wouldn't surprise me if these two fellas had a draw.
Just finally, Gareth, can I ask, the WBC are giving rankings to Jake Paul if he wins. What do you think about that? Does that legitimise what's happening tonight to some degree?
That's a very good point. It's one of the kind of undertones of this fight that Mauricio Sulaiman, the president of the World Boxing Council, the heavyweight belt that Tyson Fury holds, of course, is going to give a ranking to these guys, maybe top 40 in the cruiserweight division. It's a bit of a money grab, I think, from the WBC. They're looking for licensing fees. Neither of these men are worthy of a world title ranking at the moment. They're both novices. Jake Paul's had 6 fights, Tommy Fury 8 fights. So it's a kind of snatch and grab by the World Boxing Council a little bit for me. And there is a little bit of derision towards that from boxing insiders. But look, if Jake Paul keeps improving and he does win tonight, in 2 or 3 years' time, they'll find a little space, a little gap in the door probably for him to challenge for a title. But, you know, boxing is all about hype and promotion and money, and this is a massive money fight, and it's had a lot of hype and promotion behind it.
Certainly is.
I think he'll certainly earn some respect tonight if he wins, and maybe there's some more respect for him to be gained further down the line. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Gareth A. Davis, the boxing writer and broadcaster across everything, as usual.
I love him. He talks sense.
He does.
Talks sense every time.
Just to be clear, it's tomorrow, not tonight.
Yeah. But if he thinks Fury, I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
Yeah, I don't know enough about either boxer to know.
No. Aidan, thank you very much indeed.
You're with us next hour, aren't you?
I am indeed.
Yep.
He don't go
Lots
far
more
away.
sport action then.
Once he gets in the building, you can't keep him out the studio.
We get our money's worth.
We do get our money's worth.
That time someone did.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point. Don't go anywhere, though. Aidan's not going to be back for a little while, but we have got the papers heading your way in just a few minutes. It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel, sort of find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
8:39. Good morning to you. Sorry, my lips are very dry today. They're cracking a little bit.
He was handed lip balm on a little spoolie earlier, weren't you, by our lovely makeup artist?
I was, yeah.
Very, very fancy. Get the best treatment round here, Stephen.
They're so dry. It's terrible. Anyway, let's go through the papers this morning. Joining us is writer, journalist, and dry-lipped aficionado Andy Jones, and Ella Whelan, whose lips look very plush this morning.
You look wonderful, Ella.
I don't know why. I'm just don't ask me why. I'm just...
He hasn't had his porridge yet this morning. He's delirious.
The brain is going.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Mail, Andy, looking at re-educating non-PC pupils.
Yeah, it sounds very North Korea, doesn't it? Very sort of sending off to re-education camps. It's not quite that bad, although it's slightly alarming. Re-educating 9-year-olds and children at primary schools. This is only at 9 schools, Church of England schools in the South East. And essentially there's been concern that children are using non-PC language. They're saying things like, that is mental, or don't be a girl, don't be a sissy. What this particular trust of 9 schools is saying is, if they say it once, they get a telling off. If they say it a few times, they then go to a re-education session and take teachers are called in.
Which trust is this?
This is a Church of England trust in the South East, 9 different schools.
I mean, it's not necessarily... My instant reaction is to go, well, this is ridiculous. Some things at that age it's not necessarily a bad thing.
It depends how severe the thing that they're saying. I mean, when I was at school and I said something that was a bit mean, the teacher would just go, now, and that would be the end of it, right? And it would take quite a lot for your parents to be called in. I worry a little bit that you're then making this child feel absolutely ashamed, horrified, because, you know, their parents... If your parents are brought in when you're a child, it feels really, really serious, doesn't it? And I think, actually, it's a little bit... Is this a bit overkill? Is it a bit of an overreaction? There's nothing inherently wrong with saying to kids, maybe you could say something a bit nicer there instead of saying somebody's a big sissy or something.
I think it's a balance between you obviously don't want bad behaviour, and teachers should have the authority to discipline their students, but you also don't want to create a climate in which kids are told that tiptoeing around each other is a good way to be, you know, because you want to be able to be free to you know, not feel overly sensitive around each other. I mean, something like this is mental. I think most people can see that there's a difference between saying, you know, for example, oh, that's so gay, which was something that we now, you know, most people say that's not very pleasant, don't say that. But a difference between that and this is mental, which I think is probably most people still. I think I say that's mental.
But I don't disagree with children being taught. Do you know, because it reminds me of, and if you're old enough to remember, Joey Deacon, who was I can't remember how old he was now, but he was a disabled person, anyway, who was featured on Blue Peter.
Yeah. And he became a byword for...
Well, it did. Everyone around schools, you would get being called a Joey. I remember that at school. And in fact, it got so widespread that I remember Blue Peter did a whole thing saying it is not right, you cannot go around calling people a Joey. And quite right too, actually. So, well, it's that sort of thing where you can soften some of the terms that people are using.
And I think it's just, I think probably we're over, like you said, your instinct is to say that's mental or that's too much. And I think it's because we do have, I mean, we just covered in the last paper review the Roald Dahl censorship. We do have so much of this at the moment in society that that you can forget that, you know, teaching kids manners just on a basic level is something that I think we should still probably do.
Yeah. Can we have a look at the SNP?
Yes.
Because there's been all this hoo-ha over who's going to take over the SNP and whether they're for or anti equal marriage. And Hamza Yousaf said, well, I'm all in favour of equal marriage, but now it seems he didn't actually vote on it.
Yes, well, the knives are out in this election contest and to see who's going to be the leader. And a former Health Secretary, Alex Neil, has come out and called nonsense on Hamza Yousaf's claim. So Hamza Yousaf says that he didn't go to the second vote or the final vote of equal marriage legislation because he had a meeting with the consulate from Pakistan and it was just a diary clash. This happened years ago. Alex Neil is now coming out and saying, he's actually categorically saying on Twitter that that's a lie, and saying that actually what happened was that Hamza Yousaf asked Alex Salmond, the leader, for permission to skip the vote because he was coming under too much pressure from imams outside of politics to vote against it. Hamza Yousaf says that this is categorically untrue. You know, there's a big sort of Barney happening, but it just, I think, shows how, you know, this is obviously an important issue for lots of people. Kate Forbes has come into criticism for her position on it, but there is, you know. In Scotland, there are so many things that are going wrong at the moment, in particular in relation to Hamza Yousaf. I mean, the state of Scottish healthcare is abysmal, and this is something that he was in charge of. Then, you know, I think it probably, to some people, can feel like this is sort of, as much as it would be a problem if Hamza Yousaf is found to have told a mistruth, or how you want to diplomatically put it. There are so much bigger fish to fry in Scottish politics. And actually, the Telegraph goes into Ash Regan's plans, who's one of the hopefuls, to announce that Scotland is independent if the SNP wins the majority of seats and positions. Just announce it. And she said, well, you know, what would happen if Westminster said, hang on a minute? She says, it's none of their business. So, yeah.
Oh, there's interesting times ahead then.
But isn't it interesting, though, that gay marriage has become kind of the central component so far of the SNP leadership? I mean, this wouldn't have expected it even a few weeks ago.
It feels like it was something that we'd all sort of agreed on and moved on. And again, reaffirming Ella's point, people are struggling to heat their homes, people are struggling to eat, health systems in crisis in Scotland and elsewhere. And again, we're arguing about leadership wrangles and a cover-up being worse than the original lie in this Hamza Yousaf case.
Let's get on with what actually matters.
Andy, let's go back to schools, shall we? And this time, riots in schools. It's in the Sun.
Yes. this is in lots of papers, a toilet riot, if you will. So what's been happening at various schools up and down the country is many schools have been saying to pupils, you can only use toilets at break time, because they were abusing the privilege of, disappearing during lessons and not coming back. There's also been a huge argument across many schools of skirt lengths and should you be wearing trousers, should you wear skirts? Male headmasters measuring girls' legs and this sort of thing, which is all a bit bizarre. This has led to an organised TikTok protest, which exploded yesterday with riots at different schools, where it's supposed to be a sort of organised, peaceful protest, and actually it's led to riot police being brought into a school in Yorkshire, where a tree was set on fire and a headmaster was knocked over. A school in Banbury was closed early for the day because they couldn't control the kids. It seems It feels like something that was a fairly minor bone of contention has then sort of appeared on social media. Kids have got together and kids have been kids have caused rather a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
But there is a sort of serious discussion in this as some of the people are saying that it affects their mental health if they can't go to the toilet.
Give over. I left school 32 years ago.
It wasn't that long ago, was it?
Yes, it certainly was. Don't be sarky. And, the skirts had to be a certain length. Boys couldn't wear white socks. You couldn't go to the toilet in class time. Nothing's changed. It affected our mental health. You just had to hold on for 20 minutes till it was break and the bell went.
Yeah.
Come on.
But there is something to be said, isn't there, about when things hit social media, they can snowball. They snowball out of control.
Absolutely. I think also you see this with sort of international protests as well, where something happens in another country and then it becomes on social media and then people who have got no attachment to it whatsoever exploding with rage. One of the interesting sort of sub-points of this is one school has banned skirts and is now telling the pupils to wear trousers because that's more gender neutral. And then some of the girls are saying, well, actually, we should have the choice and all of this sort of thing. And so with this whole discussion about uniforms.
We're out of time, sadly. Ella, Andy, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
Thank you.
I did see some schoolgirls last week, actually, in skirts. And I have to say, I'm not a prude, but I was...
Very short, were they? Yeah.
It was too much. It was too much.
Come on. We had special skirts at school that you actually couldn't turn over the waistband. That's how they did it. They were like beyond the knee. It was the other way around. They're like a maxi skirt.
It's the only reason that I got good at sewing at school was to hem my skirt. And there's a great picture of me and I was in the choir and the skirts go whoop for mine.
And Ella was in a mini skirt.
My mother's poor shame watching me. It was terrible.
Oh, dear. Well, I see, we can be as uptight about it as we like. It's happened for time immemorial, hasn't it? Girls short in their skirts. There you go. Let's quickly run you through some of the other headlines today. And the PM has vowed to keep working towards securing a post-Brexit trade deal, get my teeth in, after plans for an in-person meeting with Ursula von der Leyen from the EU has been called off. Number 10 says further talks on the Northern Ireland Protocol will take place in the coming days.
The Defence Secretary says he's confident the troubled £5.5 billion programme to build new army tanks has turned a corner. The project to build nearly 600 Ajax fighting vehicles has received severe criticism, having run for nearly 13 years without deploying a single tank.
And about 3,000 Ukrainians living in the UK will get a chance to have a ticket for Eurovision, of course, which is happening in Liverpool this year.
Now, when you think of a spiritual leader, perhaps the last thing that goes through your head is then imagine that religious leader as a driver in a race car.
Ah, well, why not, though? Because that's the case for Simon Butler, the Racing Rev, a Basingstoke vicar, who is the only man of the cloth to compete at international level racing tournaments.
Oh, we're very happy to say that this morning we are joined by Simon himself, who is here to tell us more. So, Simon, good morning to you. Fantastic to have you on the programme with us. So tell us the story then. How did you become the Racing Reverend?
So I started racing when I was in my early teens because my younger brother, who was 4 years younger than me, was a much better football player than I was. So I needed to find a sport that I could be better than my younger brother at. And having always loved cars, I decided to give motor racing a go. And it's been a kind of a constant fixture in my life, for the last 30 plus seasons.
think that some people are shocked at a Racing Reverend, because you're only human at the end of the day. You can do what you like, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, you know, if it's in contradiction to the standards of the Church of England, or kind of, it might be a problem. But I think motor racing is fine. And yeah, you know, clergy have all sorts of different interests and live full lives beyond their work. And I think that's quite expected and quite normal. There was one other vicar who was a rally driver in the 60s. And I suppose that possibly was even more shocking then than it is now.
And what do your parishioners make of this hobby of yours?
I think a lot of them quite enjoy it. So where we are, a lot of the guys in particular, but also some of the girls, are really into cars. We have kind of a group of guys who meets pretty much every week in the local pub, and we all take our sports cars down and just bore each other to death with the fine details of engines and gearboxes. And I think by and large people quite like the fact that it's different, and it's something that gives me life and actually nourishes my work and my ministry.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's not to criticise people of the cloth who don't have such an active outside life, but actually there's something beneficial, isn't there, as having, you know, these outside interests, and that broadens your horizons and your perspective on people and the world and the country we're in.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the danger particularly with full-time vicaring, is that you can very quickly be sucked into the world of the church, and that begins to dominate everything, and the time available to go beyond that is limited, because it's a pretty consuming job. So to have something beyond that, I think is good for the soul, and it's good because it gives me a chance to connect with people in a very different world to the world that I live in normally.
Union from the driver's seat, you could get through plenty of parishioners that way, couldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the wider sort of paddock, I don't hide the fact that I'm a vicar. It's what I do, and it's who I am. And actually, there's quite a lot of interest in it, and I'm sort of, you know, known as the Rev, and the usual kind of array of really terrible jokes that I've heard 1,000 times. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I think it's a really positive thing. I think the more, you know, men and women of the cloth can be seen as real human beings, I think it's a really positive thing, actually.
Yeah,
I
absolutely,
love it.
yeah. Simon, really, really good to have you on the programme this morning.
I was trying to come up with a really bad pun, but as you say, you've heard them all a million times before, so I won't bother.
I can guarantee it.
yeah, I bet you have. Simon, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lovely. I love it. Really positive stuff.
Brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, if you're out driving today, here's what the forecast is like.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. This weekend it's dry and settled. There will be some sunshine, and where those skies remain clear, a return of frost at night too. Looking at the pressure pattern, high pressure dominates right through the weekend and actually much of next week too, keeping all the weather systems behind me out in the Atlantic. Lots of dry and settled weather to come. So this morning, it's a dry start for many, frosty start in places, but plenty of sunshine. Just cloudier skies across the north and the east. Keen northerly breeze at first will bring in showers, this easing as we head through into the afternoon. Lots of places staying dry, the best of the sunshine holding on across parts of Northern Ireland, perhaps western Scotland, but most places dry with some bright spells. Temperatures a little lower than recent days, 6 to 9 Celsius, but that's where we should be for the time of year. Perhaps still feeling chilly along some eastern coast with that northerly breeze. Into the evening time, we'll see the clouds starting to melt away, longer, clearer periods developing, though there's still the risk of a few showers coming in off the North Sea down some eastern coasts. Under the clearest skies for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps Wales and southwest England, -2 to -4 Celsius. So a frost developing here, patchier further east where we see a little bit more cloud. So into Sunday, cloudy across some eastern areas to start. The risk still of a few showers coming through from the North Sea. Best of the sunshine across the northwest, but even here we'll see the cloud move and bubble up as we go into the afternoon. Elsewhere across England and Wales, a lot of cloud into the afternoon, but there will be some bright or sunny spells. The southeast of England seeing the highest temperatures around 9 Celsius in any sunshine. So overall temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius around average for the time of year. Very little change as we go into next week. At the start of next week, high pressure holding on. A lot of cloud around, but there'll be some sunny spells, lots of dry weather, and temperatures still around average. See you again soon.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m, Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Rishi Sunak is poised to announce a new Northern Ireland protocol as early as Monday.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock on Saturday, the 25th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Stephen and Ellie.
These are your top stories this morning, and with Cabinet Ministers said to be on alert for a conference call this weekend, Westminster is braced for a Northern Ireland protocol announcement. The Prime Minister reportedly preparing to reveal that new Brexit deal after Downing Street claimed he's got last-minute concessions from Brussels.
Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. A minute's silence was held in the UK, led by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, to pay tribute to Ukrainians everywhere. It comes as the UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace ruled out sending RAF Typhoon jets to the front line.
China's called for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, setting out a 12-point plan to bring the conflict to a close. That comes after reports from the US Secretary of State claiming that China was considering supplying weapons and ammunition to Moscow, although that was denied by Beijing.
And the Six Nations is back in action this weekend. Can Wales get their tournament back on track with a victory against Cardiff? No, in England, in Cardiff, should I say? Or will the turmoil of narrowly avoiding strike action still loom over the team? We'll be taking a look with a former Welsh rugby player later.
And if you can make sense of any of the words we're saying this morning, then we'd love to hear from you. gbnews@gbnews.uk. It's a bit like Morecambe and Wise.
Yeah.
They're all the right words. They're
They know
just
what
not
I mean.
necessarily in the right
Yeah,
order.
they know what I mean.
Yes.
England in Cardiff, not Cardiff in England. Yes.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Rugby
Anyway,
football.
we will have Aidan McGee on later, who does know a thing or two about
he'll
sports.
sort
And that's
it out.
good, because we don't,
No.
evidently.
But he's our expert.
Yes.
We do know one or two things about politics, so this is... So it does get very complicated. So we've got our own expert with us this morning, because Conservative MPs have been told to be in Parliament on Monday. Now, that means the Prime Minister could be set to reveal his new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
It'll be no mean feat, though, as he faces opposition from both the DUP and his own party, with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson leading the charge to defend his protocol bill. Well, let's speak now to our political reporter, Catherine Forster. So we've just been speaking there, Catherine, about all MPs being called into Parliament on Monday, three-line whip, as it's known. How rare is that, and how much should we read into that this could mean there's a new Brexit deal on the table?
Well, it seems to be very significant because clearly something major is brewing. There is an expectation that Rishi Sunak is going to announce a deal on the protocol with the EU, and potentially there may be a vote on it on Monday. But we have been here before, haven't we? I mean, we were sort of here last week. It was expected to be announced. It was expected to be put to Cabinet. And Brexit and Northern Ireland have been this ongoing, difficult, tortuous process. But it sounds very positive. Rishi Sunak seems to believe that they've met the DUP's 7 tests, although for all the progress that has clearly been made in that the checks on goods going over to Ireland, to Northern Ireland, not onto the south, will be gone. The role of the ECJ will be minimised, and things like, for the first time, Westminster will be able to set Northern Ireland's VAT and state aid policy, which they haven't been able to do, because Northern Ireland is effectively still within the EU single market, and that has brought all sorts of problems. This need to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland has made this all very difficult. So it sounds positive, but the DUP and the ERG, it's important to have them on board. Now, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, is saying that they won't sign off a deal that the DUP are not OK with. But there's all this briefing and counter-briefing, and elsewhere it's being said that, well, they're just going to put the deal out there and the DUP can take it or leave it. So it's very difficult to know what to believe. Everybody is saying slightly different things.
I mean, it's extraordinary, because, I mean, if that was the case, that they've come up with an idea, they put it forward and then see what the DUP says, you can't put it past any politician to be that blind, can you? But, I mean, that would be absolutely crackers, to be perfectly honest. They need to have... if they're going to make a big announcement, they need to have got these key players on side first, don't they?
But the thing is that the DUP ultimately want no EU involvement in Northern Ireland at all, quite understandably, because they believe that Northern Ireland should be treated exactly the same as the rest of Great Britain, because we voted for Brexit. And because of the issue with the border and protecting the Good Friday Agreement and all the attention that went on that, the Northern Ireland has been left in this halfway house where it's out, but it's still sort of in, and it's very difficult to see how the EU are going to... Now, the EU have compromised, and they have given quite a lot of ground compared to what we've previously had, but the EU completely rolling over and going, OK, fine, we won't involve ourselves in any way, it's difficult to see how that's going to happen.
But I mean, the big point that the EU was making at the time of the Brexit negotiations and all the rest of it was that paramount importance to them was peace in Northern Ireland. That's what they were saying. Now, there's a strong argument to be made, isn't there, that in fact, unless they keep their intervention to an absolute minimum, what that actually does is jeopardise peace in Northern Ireland. So it can be played back on them, can't it?
It can, and certainly all the focus on avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland, there didn't seem to be much attention paid to the impact of putting, effectively, a border down the Irish Sea and separating one part of the United Kingdom from the rest of it. Clearly, with Unionists, that was going to go down extremely badly, and so it has proved. So there are real risks from the Irish protocol as it stands that would undermine the Good Friday Agreement, in that the Unionists feel aggrieved and the potential for violence there. So, I mean, Northern Ireland and Brexit, it's like Groundhog Day. You go round and round and round, but yeah.
And this is a political gamble, isn't it, for Rishi Sunak? I mean, there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders, not least for restoring power sharing in the Northern Ireland Assembly. But there's also that risk of fresh battles with the ERG, with the DUP, and he's also got Boris Johnson and Liz Truss waiting in the wings, waiting, surely, to criticise him.
Yeah, I mean, and they're not really waiting to criticise. They're sort of, they're already
over this issue.
Well, Liz Truss, but yes, Boris Johnson obviously was agreed to the protocol. Now, obviously, there were reasons for that, because he wanted a Brexit deal. He wanted to get it over the line. They hoped that it wouldn't be implemented as rigidly as it has been. So that's understandable. But this is of his making. And the DUP's Sammy Wilson, who was saying yesterday, yes, Boris Johnson has been in touch with us. He's been advising us. Very unhelpful for Rishi Sunak. But then Sammy Wilson was saying, as really, he should, because he said he's got a duty to help, because after all, he was the person who got it to this situation that we're presently in. So Boris Johnson is now holding himself up as, let's just sort this out. Let's get this deal that we've got, the Irish Protocol Bill, to basically put this all in the bin and then we'll be free. But it's a deal that he'd negotiated, and it's not as simple as that, because if they take that unilateral sort of nuclear option of binning the deal, that's going to create huge problems as well.
Yeah, and you can say, that's when the EU's going to start being really problematic.
No, I mean, we could have a trade war then, couldn't we?
Yeah.
So, it sounds hopeful, but I think we've all learned that until we know and it's done, things can always go horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah, no, fair point. Catherine, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Phil's been in touch. Morning, Phil. Says, I hear quite a bit about Northern Ireland in the EU deal, but very little about Gibraltar. After Brexit, Gibraltar became part of the Schengen area and therefore had to follow many EU laws on businesses and trade. And so Phil goes on. Now, I have to say, I wasn't aware of that. And I know Gibraltar well. And the Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, is someone I very much enjoy spending time with. The difference is, of course, that Gibraltar is not part of the UK. It's an overseas territory, overseas sovereign territory, so it isn't part of the UK in that sense. You wouldn't know it to be there, because it's the most British place I've ever been. Let me tell you, it's fabulous, is Gibraltar. But it is a slightly different setup. But I mean, you raise a very good point.
Yeah, but if you are watching or listening to us in Northern Ireland this morning, do get in touch. Let us know what you think about the prospect of a new Brexit deal. What would you like to see in it? What detail would you like to see? Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Oh, we were talking about stolen cars earlier on and all the rest of it, and I was saying, what do you call it when two cars are, they're cut in half and then attached to a different car? Jean, morning, Jean. Now you knew what I was thinking, Jean. She says, two cars welded together. The word you're looking for is ringer.
Ringer.
That's it, a ringer.
We can always rely on the viewers and listeners, can't we? If we don't know it, they will, and we just throw it out there and it comes back. It's like
back.
A boomerang. We just throw
It is
it
like
out.
a boomerang. Ringer. It's exactly what I was thinking of,
Thanks,
Jean. Thank
Jean.
you very much indeed. It is 10 minutes past 9. Let's bring you up to date with the other headlines then. And Volodymyr Zelensky says he plans to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping after Beijing yesterday set out a peace plan Ukraine's president didn't say when the meeting might happen, but told a news conference that it would be beneficial for both countries and for security in the world. President Biden disagrees, though. He told ABC News the proposals only benefit Russia.
Detectives investigating the attempted murder of an officer in Omagh in County Tyrone have made a 5th arrest. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical condition after being shot outside a sports centre on Wednesday evening. Police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the incident as terrorist-related, with the new IRA being their main line of inquiry.
Hundreds of people will protest against the privatisation of the NHS in Westminster today. Organisers want to emphasise avoidable deaths in the health service, which they claim is down to privatisation. The campaign group We Own It says the government wastes money on privatisation, diverting much-needed resources away from the NHS. On the NHS, Tony says, we know that public companies are always inefficient. This has been one since 1948. Keep politicians out of it.
And very interesting view from Andrew here, who, as a district nursing assistant in the NHS, who I might add is also exhausted mentally and physically, he writes, we need less pen-pushing managers and more frontline staff. We are already well-trained, but we are poorly paid for the skills that we possess. There needs to be an overhaul starting at the top and an overhaul of the banding pay scale. Quite often the roles between the bands are being blurred. It's no wonder that people are going to America, Canada, New Zealand and Australia, where the pay is better.
Interesting. Keep your thoughts coming through. I think it's always best thoughts are from people, I think, when it comes to things like the NHS and how to look at reform or fund or whatever with the NHS, it's people who are working on the front line, I think, whose voices aren't heard enough. Not saying you've always got the right answers, because all sorts goes on, doesn't there? But it's fascinating to get your thoughts. Keep them coming through.
Yeah. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he plans to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping after Beijing yesterday set out a 12-point peace plan to end the war.
Yeah, President Biden's not happy, though. He says the proposals only benefit Russia.
Certainly very interesting. Let's speak to the assistant editor at The Spectator, Cindy Yu. So, Cindy, we've got the 12-point peace plan here. I won't go through all of the details, but it does seem very reasonable on first reading. So, respecting the sovereignty of all countries, abandoning the Cold War mentality, ceasing hostilities and resuming peace talks. Those are only the first 4 points. So quite remarkable, really, from China to wade into this, talking about peace and laying out their stance on all of this, but already been shut down, really, from the US, from Joe Biden, talking to ABC News. He said that this can't be any good, it's only serving Putin. What do you make of all of this?
I mean, look, US-China relations are not in a good place right now after the whole spy balloon furore only a few weeks ago. So I think, I think Biden, you're right to say that this plan, on the face of it, is actually quite reasonable. I mean, this is exactly what China has been saying over the course of the last year. Obviously, some of its wolf warriors have gone a bit further in the rhetoric. But if you read what the Chinese have been saying, this is what they want. But I think what Biden thinks is that if peace talks happen now, Russia would be going into those peace talks with the territories that it has gained over the last year, which leaves Ukraine on a worse negotiating footing.
So would it, in effect, mean Ukraine would have to cede the lands that it has lost?
It certainly means that, I think it's like any negotiation. If you go into the negotiation, you're haggling, you want to have as much confirmed and banked as possible. So I think for Ukraine to be going into these negotiations with parts of the Donbass still under Russian control, Crimea certainly gone, Luhansk and Donetsk. So all of this would mean that it would be a bit more difficult for Ukraine to negotiate those places back than if it had claimed it back in the war.
But what is fascinating then is President Biden says no, EU says no.
Yeah.
President Zelensky says let's meet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Zelensky has to keep the Chinese on side. I mean, the most immediate term is because he doesn't want the Chinese to be giving arms to Russia, something that the Americans are allegedly worried about. But in the long term, it is going to be China who helps with the reconstruction of Ukraine, not from necessarily, goodwill, but because it's good business. China has been doing that across the world over the last decade with its Belt and Road Initiative. So with the reconstruction of a country, it would be very good business for Chinese companies to go build roads, go build hospitals, factories, mines, whatever it is that it has done in the rest of the world. And I think at that point, I mean, this is very far down the line, at that point, the West needs to think about what can we give Ukraine to avoid Ukraine from falling into the Chinese sphere of influence when it comes to reconstruction. So people talk about a Marshall Plan being brought back for Ukraine's reconstruction from the West. But I think that will be a bit of a dogfight. But for now, Zelensky has to keep the Chinese on side.
Why do you think the West has responded the way it has? I mean, President Biden and the EU, it does seem like quite a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of it is going into negotiations with as much territory under your belt as possible. And given the arms that NATO is giving Ukraine at the moment, I think there are some people in the West who think that actually, they can take back all of this territory through war, not through negotiations. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, one would be justified to think that the Chinese are not being completely genuine with this. Because if they cared about ending the war, if they cared about the sovereignty of all countries, then, well, they should have done more over the last year. Instead of sitting on the sidelines, instead of criticising the West for expanding NATO, it should have actually brought Putin down to the table in the way that Erdogan from Turkey did at the early days of the war. And the Chinese really has done nothing of the sort. They've kind of sat on the sidelines trying to get benefits from every possible side, incredibly shrewd, without giving any commitments of resources on their own side.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just fascinated by the whole thing because it's like an onion. Isn't it? There are so many layers.
Yeah.
And that's reflected a little bit from David and Ellis. Ellis says China will have learned from the war in Ukraine. They can see the destruction and risks. Their plan for peace is a good sign they want the world stabilised, for whatever motivation there. David says, I think we've got to be very cautious about accepting any proposals set out by China. China under President Xi is a brutal regime with just as many crimes against humanity and is not to be trusted.
I mean, that's a factual... that's true. But I think, when we're going into international relations, trust is a very difficult thing to have, especially in this moment at the moment. So there's a question of trust where even Western allies don't necessarily trust each other. If you look at the ways in which the US often... we know from the Edward Snowden leaks that spied on its own allies. So I think trust in international relations probably doesn't get anyone anywhere. You've always got to be a bit careful and watch your own back. The problem with crimes against humanity within Chinese borders is that, well, there's always going to be countries like that. That's not to justify it, but it's to say if you want to coexist on the same world together, you've got to think about what the best way of managing them is. Is the best way to manage them to say, we don't want anything to do with you, we're going to cut you completely out of everything we do, reject everything that you say? Is that the best way? Or is the best way to manage their risks, make sure that they have a carrot and stick approach when it comes to that? And arguably, the Russian invasion is because the West has pushed Russia away so much instead of listening to some of its concerns about NATO expansion.
And you've got to remember as well the context of all of this, because this peace plan from China has come amongst claims from the US who believe strongly that China is considering sending weapons and ammunition to Russia. Obviously, Beijing have denied that so far. But even on Friday, American media again were talking about the Chinese government selling drones and artillery shells to Moscow. How much do you think that is the case that is about to happen?
I think that would be a misstep from Beijing's perspective. As I say, they've got a lot out of this invasion in terms of cheap Russian gas, in terms of being able to bash the West over the head, but without losing any European trade, really, because they haven't been more involved. So if they were to be more involved, I think they would lose that kind of benefit they get from sitting on the sidelines. I think that would be a misstep. I don't have any intelligence tracks into the American intelligence community. Interestingly, though, President Biden said to ABC last night that he doesn't actually think that the Chinese are going to give arms, which seemed to directly contradict what Antony Blinken, his right-hand man, had said. So that could be Biden misspeaking. He's known to be doing that, Sleepy Joe. Or it could be that I mean, I don't know what it could be. It just seems bizarre that the president said in that same interview that he doesn't actually think the Chinese will give arms. I mean, if there is disagreement within the government about that, then it's quite dangerous at this moment, I think, to have some of these things, narratives, uncontrolled and inconsistent from the American side.
Just very, very briefly, do you think there's a lot of backdoor diplomacy going on here?
God, I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. I mean, with the spy balloon situation, it escalated so quickly that I'm not sure there is, but I really hope so, because even in the Cold War, we had that.
Yeah. Cindy, as always,
Thanks
really
so
good
much,
to talk.
Cindy.
Thanks very much. Well, it has been more than a year, of course, now, a year yesterday since Russia began its full-scale invasion. And there is, as we've been saying, no end in sight as yet.
Well, yesterday, Britain held a minute's silence in honour of the many thousands of Ukrainians that have died since the conflict began, while Ukraine's allies reaffirmed their commitment to helping the country towards victory over its neighbour.
Well, our reporter Will Hollis was following events yesterday around that one-year anniversary.
It was the siren that signalled the coming change. In a matter of hours, Russia's invasion turned millions of Ukrainians into refugees and transformed tens of thousands of civilians into soldiers. President Zelensky, once a comedian, now a celebrated war leader. We will defeat all threats, he says 1 year on, speaking to his nation. He describes it as a year of bravery and hope, a year of invincibility. The war in the East has been ongoing since 2014, but few believed Russia would launch a full-scale invasion of its neighbour, and in turn that Ukraine could hold out for so long. Since then, 8,000 Ukrainian civilians have died. The true number will be much higher. From the fighting, more than 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers are thought to have been killed. Russian losses could be twice as many. In Britain, the war has been marked with silence. From the start of the invasion, the UK has stood beside its Ukrainian ally. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak welcomed his counterpart in recent weeks. Yesterday, at the Ukrainian Catholic Church in London, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson lighted candles. Meanwhile, King Charles, who met President Zelensky on his visit, said that Ukrainians have endured unimaginable suffering during the war, while applauding support from Britain and its allies. At times symbolic, this street in London renamed Kyiv Road, but weapons are the true signifier of commitment. Poland's Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, confirmed delivery of the Leopard 2 tanks his country pledged to the cause.
It's not only documents.
Not only documents. Real tanks are also there.
We have freedom. Give us wings to protect it.
Ukraine asks for jets, but Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says it's not as simple as handing them over, but there are other options.
If there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected.
Putin's so-called special military operation, for the most part, has failed. Yet he has mobilised his homeland and has resources for a long war. His friends in China have suggested a constructive ceasefire and de-escalation. It's unknown if the Russian leader is listening. But the world is watching, wondering what might happen next. Will Hollis, GB News.
Well, coming up in just a moment, we're going to be talking to an incredibly brave man, a quadruple amputee who's just returned from Ukraine. He's been there helping soldiers who've lost their limbs in the war. Talk to him in just a couple of minutes.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
"9:28, you're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie, and half of you watching and listening seems to be very au fait with the criminal world.
Yes.
Not saying, I'm not casting any aspersions, but we're saying about these cars that you cut in half and stick back together. And Jean said, well, that's a ringer, which is the term I was thinking of. Got to be honest. Oh no, Lance. David in Suffolk, Nicky, Jim, to name just a few, say, no. A ringer is when you swap plates and sort of illegally change the identity of the car. Maybe sand off the VIN number and all that sort of thing. And when you sit the 2 cars together, as the expert we were talking to earlier on, that's a cut and shut.
Yeah.
So there you go. So you all know what ringers are.
Yeah,
what does
quite
that mean?
Impressed, really. That came in very quickly.
Very
response
quickly.
to that. And a few on skirts as well. We were talking about... Why are we talking about skirts? Oh, there's been riots.
Papers.
Yes, there's been riots at some schools over male teachers looking at skirt lengths of girls, measuring skirt lengths of some female pupils. Anyway, Sue says, I was at grammar school in the 60s and we had to kneel on the floor. Yes, Sue, I did this as well. If the teacher thought our skirt was too short, if it didn't touch the floor, we had to get it lengthened. Trouble with schools these days is there's not enough discipline to teach kids self-restraint.
Yeah, well, and Anne says a similar thing about 1960s at grammar school, kneeling on the floor, and the headmistress would come round with a ruler to see if they're too short. But
nothing new, is it?
You see, I see, because I was saying, I saw a couple of schoolgirls last week, actually, when I was in Scotland, and the skirts were unbelievably short. And when I made a point of going, oh, my goodness, look at those girls. But it's happened. I mean, my mother used to sort of hike her skirt up and all that. I remember trying to be, but that was in the sort of days of when mini skirts were a real thing and all that.
Yeah.
So it's always happened. It's always happened. The trouble is, as we get older, we do think, oh, isn't it a disgrace what young people are doing today? But we all did it back.
It's always happened, hasn't it? But do keep your views coming in on any of the stories that we're talking about this morning. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We like to hear from you.
We do.
Keep us very busy. It's good.
And if you know any more terms about crime
And car theft, do let us know.
Why do you know so much?
Yeah, it's quite impressive, really.
Oh, Nikki, I wonder what you get up to in your spare time, Nikki. But there you go. Cut and shut, ringers, twackers, all the rest of it.
Cover it all here, don't we?
Yeah. Anyway, look, should we go from that to something inspirational?
Yes. It's always nice, isn't it, to have a bit of inspiration on a Saturday morning, and we've got that for you next, because 10 years ago, Alex Lewis contracted Strep A and suffered life-changing injuries. Now, a quadruple amputee, Alex has been to Ukraine to help some of those who've been affected by the war.
Yeah, he travelled in a van from Poland to Ukraine, along with a medical team and an artificial limb expert who helped him, actually, to try to give hope to those in need, and he joins us now. It's amazing to talk to you, Alex. I mean, it must be so difficult. I mean, the injuries that you went through and the life-changing surgery that you had to have. First and foremost, tell us, how did you even come to terms with what was happening to you 10 years ago?
I was quite fortunate, really, because the way that I came to terms with my disability was I had to do everything in my power to get back to my wife and son. And it became very clear that quadruple amputation was the how I was going to cope with it. And the why was Lucy and Sam. So everything that I did was for them. So I pushed myself harder than I'd ever pushed myself before. I did all my rehab. I did everything I could just to try and get back home and be as good a dad as I could be to my little boy and as good a partner as I could be to Lucy.
Oh, you really are such an inspirational man, Alex. It really is extraordinary, your story. What made you want to take yourself and your story to Ukraine?
Well, I've had an incredible 10 years now, and a lot of the work that I do is in university research. So I give myself to the universities to redesign prosthetics, wheelchairs, orthotics. I'm like a quadruple amputee guinea pig, really. And over the years, we've developed new and affordable technology. And I was contacted by a friend of mine, Nicholas Meller, and he and I worked on projects together at Imperial. And he said, look, an opportunity's come up. We could go to the Ukraine. He said, would you want to go? And I was like, absolutely, 100%. But for me, my story, I'm only here now because of the incredible National Health Service. But there were two people in particular. So Dr. Jeff Watson, who saved my life nearly 10 years ago, and Alex Crick, who was is my plastic surgeon. These two guys have been integral in my life and how I look at my viewpoint, how I look at disability, how I want to strive to make changes to my world in terms of the prosthetics and orthotics, which are mostly very expensive. How do we drop that cost? So to go to the Ukraine, for us, it was about developing a better patient pathway, really, from immediately after amputation. Can we give them a soft prosthetic so they can learn to live with that upper limb amputation, to all the way down the line when the war is over? How do we get these guys back home to their families and back into work, back into their communities, and for them to be inclusive? So it's a long program about how we develop that route.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long programme and for each individual involved in this, it must be a long and difficult journey, but it is important then, isn't it? And I guess a lot of what you're doing is just providing that hope and to say that actually life doesn't end just because you're an amputee. Life goes on and life can be good.
Absolutely. This is peer-to-peer support. Some of the most important conversations that I've had in the last 10 years have been from other amputees that have done some extraordinary things. And I've never forgotten that. And to meet some of the injured over in the Ukraine recently, their desire is to go back to the front line and to defend their country and to win the war. But, you know, for me, they have wives, they have girlfriends, husbands. You know, how do we get them back to a home life that is so important, and for them to see a life after the conflict? And I think that's really important, that we give them that hope that they can actually go home. And a great example is a chap who had partial paralysis in his right leg. Now, he's a farmer. He has 6 children. 4 children are fighting in the conflict. He's got grandchildren, and he is the main source of money. You know, he has to farm the land, and he didn't feel that he would be able to go back to drive his tractor. Well, for me to adapt a tractor for him to use in the UK is relatively simple. So how do we take that skill set here and transport it over to Ukraine so he can farm his land again? So I think that's all part of the programme that we're trying to develop.
Oh, well, Alex, you're absolutely inspirational. I'm sure you've helped so many people in this journey. What is your message to people who are watching and listening, not just in Ukraine, but anybody who is an amputee, who has lost a limb? What's your message to them today?
Well, life certainly doesn't stop. My life in the last 10 years has got better and better and better. And in all honesty, if anybody had the ability to give me my legs and arms back today, I wouldn't take them, because what I've achieved in the last 10 years has been far more than I ever achieved in the previous 33. And build a team. You know, I'm only doing what I'm doing with great people that have supported me over the last decade. And, you know, this is not I'm not a lone wolf. You know, there's lots and lots of people that have sort of picked me up and moved me into different directions. And, you know, just the things that I went out to Ukraine a few days ago, you know, it's just incredible. But I can't do it without great people.
Well, I tell you, I mean, it is inspirational, and I think it will just give a lot of hope to people and those people who feel on their own when they go through this sort of incredible physical trauma. It's really good to talk to you, Alex. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
No, it's remarkable.
One inspirational man.
It is absolutely remarkable. But as you say, it's about saying to people, life doesn't end.
No.
You have to adapt. In Alex's case, you have to adapt an awful lot. But as you said, it almost seems like it's given his life a bit more purpose. He feels he's had a better 10 years now
than the 33 before that. I mean, wasn't that remarkable when he said that if somebody gave him the opportunity to give him back his legs and his arms, he wouldn't take them because he's had a better 10 years without them. It's incredible, really, the mindset that some people are just inspirational, strong.
Good on him.
Yep.
Look, don't go anywhere. We've got lots coming up for you, including all the showbiz news with Stephanie and the sport with Ada.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations. for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
9:42, good morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Yes, and we've got lots coming up for you now with sports and showbiz. Behave.
Yes,
he's in charge of our autocue and he's going too slow.
I haven't done anything, but I can tell you that our very own Ada McGee and Stephanie Tetchy are both here. Morning, you two troublemakers.
Morning. We're not troublemakers, are we, Aidan?
So are. We're going to kick off with the sport. Should we eat a bit of Six Nations, Aidan?
Yeah, it's back on after a break last week. We're seeing Wales against England today. Wales have an excellent record against England in recent years, but there is a bit of a noise in the background at the moment with Wales, a dispute, a standoff between the players and the Welsh Rugby Union over payments and whether they're going to keep some of the regions going. And there was an argument yesterday about £4.8 million in the Wales coffers, and they decided to improve corporate facilities instead of paying the players. So it's all going off. I don't know if that's conducive to good performance, but somebody who knows a bit more is the former Wales scrum half, David Llewellyn. David, what have you made of what's happened in the last couple of weeks? Because it's been unedifying, to say the least, but also, judging by the results, it hasn't helped the squad.
I know there's been a bit of turmoil in Welsh rugby at the moment, obviously contractual disputes there, but thankfully they've sat down and common sense have prevailed, and the game is on today, and hopefully the players will turn up mentally today and obviously prepared themselves physically. And it's a big clash in the Principality Stadium today, and hopefully the boys perform well.
Mentality is a key thing, though, isn't it, David? I mean, is it easy to just switch from one thing to another? I mean, yes, they do well against England, but nonetheless a tough proposition.
Oh, yeah. England are a world-class rugby team. They got a big pool of players to pull from. The strength and depth in the Premiership is huge. We struggle in at regional rugby, and grassroots rugby needs to be looked at in our towns, villages, and so on. So, yeah, it's an huge game.
What about the rest of the action over the weekend? We've got some excellent games going on. I mean, the standout one for me is France against Scotland tomorrow. If Scotland get a good start early in the game, maybe silence the crowd, could that be the key to victory?
Yeah, it's never easy, playing against France, particularly in France. I can recall I was part of the team that won in France for 25 years. We went out there in the Six Nations. And the French crowd are intimidating, but if you keep the crowd quiet, the crowd can turn on the French. But it's a massive task for Scotland today, because the French will be looking to bounce back from the loss against Ireland.
Talking of Ireland, they're first up this afternoon. Huge opportunity for them. Yes, OK, Italy tend to be quite strong at home. They gave France a run for their money 3 weeks ago, but a huge chance for them to really press home their advantage that they built up so far in the Six Nations. They look like the best side in the world right now, as their billing would suggest.
Oh yeah, they're very clinical. They look very strong up front. You know, with Johnny Sexton running the ship at 10, he's world class even at 36, 37. Yeah, they're very clinical. A great structure, great coaching staff. You know, and that haven't happened overnight. It's taken a handful of years to develop that style that they want to play. And they've got great infrastructure at the regional and grassroots level coming through. And fair play to them, they've got it right.
Very much indeed for joining us this morning here on GB News. We hope you enjoy the weekend's action. So, yeah, a lot of noise around Wales going into that game. But don't write them off. They're particularly strong against England at home at the Principality.
It'll be a Welsh win. You do your first. It'll be a Welsh win. And
a Welsh win.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, good. Fair enough.
Thanks, David.
If David had said anything else, I'd have been worried.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
But no, he could well be right. He could well be right.
Aidan, can we have a quick word on the boxing? Because we didn't get your take earlier. And Stephanie, I think you can come into this as well.
I love boxing.
But Tommy Fury, Jake Paul, I mean, is it sport or is it showbiz?
It's a bit of both.
How seriously do we take this?
It's a bit of a... Well, I hope you both take showbiz and sport very seriously. But yeah, it's boxing, but not as we know. But you cannot ignore those numbers. That's a fact.
What are the numbers?
Well, the purse is going to be worth something like... I mean, I thought it was going to be worth about $7.5 million. Gareth A. Davis last hour said it was going to be more like 14, 15. So one of us is wrong, that's for sure. But it's a pay-per-view event, so there's not many sports around that you can sell tickets on the back of a subscription and charge a supplementary fee for people to watch. It's in Saudi. The fact that Saudi are interested in the first place suggests there's money.
Families there.
Yeah.
Exactly. You've got some stellar names in boxing as well. Mike Tyson's there as well. So, I mean, and the WBC are granting ranking points to Jake Paul if he wins. So that legitimises it. So that I think at some point you're going to have to respect him as a boxer. You never know. It's 8 rounds. You might see a decent tear-up tonight. So, I mean, I think a lot of people will watch, that's for sure. And let's just see what happens.
Well, sports and money go hand in hand. And the thing, someone like Jake Paul, he's got millions of followers. So having him in the ring is just going to attract those viewers to watch the match. And I just think, we see influencers in so many different sectors of society. So why not sports? And I think there's going to be more matches like that to come in the future.
I think you could be right. Mind you, Fury was getting the nod from Gareth O. Davis, wasn't he? And he's a man I trust. So
yeah, he is.
Actually, he's Tyson Fury's half-brother. I'm...
Must be in the blood.
Yeah,
you would think so, but he's not fought anyone decent, I have to say. I mean, his career is still very embryonic. I'm not saying I want to go 8 rounds with him, but his career is very much in its infancy. He has to win tonight because if he loses, then I would suggest that's his career over.
I was about to say, it's a big risk, isn't it? He's only 23.
That's all right. It's a good thing the purse is big.
He'll
get
£5
million
either which way.
I have a feeling he's going to lose.
Do you? No.
I think Logan Paul's a bit hungry, so I can see him taking it.
Oh, well, we shall see. 8 now. Steph.
Yeah.
What's going on with Ricky Gervais? I love Ricky Gervais.
Oh, he is so funny. But, it's been the big question of the week, whether Roald Dahl's book should be edited or not. And Ricky Gervais, he's kind of waded into the big argument at the moment. And he said that, he's pondering himself whether his works are going to be edited when he dies. So he took it to Twitter and he said that, he was mocking people for being a bit too fragile. And he was saying, when he dies, are things such as the words he's used, such as fat and ugly, going to be edited out of his own art that he's put out there with his comedy work. And it's a good point of discussion that's happened this week.
I just love the fact that you've used the 2 words that we can use.
He used more sweary words than that. But I think this week a lot of people have been considering whether their art will be changed. I don't think anyone's expected Roald Dahl's work to be changed the way it has done this week.
No, I mean, it just seems extraordinary, doesn't it? But I like the fact that with Ricky Gervais, he sort of says it how it is. And you either have to take him or leave him, and he doesn't care.
Well, I think comedians can get away with that. I think if anyone else puts it out there, then they're at risk of being cancelled, where with a comedian it could be a bit tongue-in-cheek. which we all like a bit sometimes.
And it's what he stands for ultimately, isn't it? It's free speech.
I do think that script from 2001, 2002, those two series of The Office, I don't think they'd be written that way now.
No.
So,
You say that about a lot of comedy, though.
oh, you could, yeah.
Like even in Betweeners. I mean, how?
Oh, yeah,
that
goodness,
wasn't
no,
even that
that's
long.
2008.
Yeah, but not
Is
even
that a bit dodgy now?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Doesn't mean it's not funny.
Everything's
but
up for debate.
I know.
Yeah.
And
I'd be
TV
nervous to
editing.
be a comic in today's world. You can't say a lot, can you?
No.
Without being cancelled.
That's why I do well with my gags, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
They're generally safe.
Let's talk Eurovision.
Eurovision, I cannot wait. The countdown has begun. Obviously, it's happening on May the 13th. But the government has done a really good thing because even though it's been hosted in Liverpool, it's very much Ukraine's Eurovision. It just can't be hosted in Ukraine for obvious reasons. But there's going to be 3,000 tickets that's going to be available to Ukrainians who've been displaced from the country and who are living in the UK. So people who are going to be able to apply for the Homes for Ukraine scheme, the Ukraine Family Scheme and the Ukraine Extension Scheme. So they'll be able to watch all 9 live shows for the Eurovision. So Eurovision, even though it's all about the big final, there's 9 shows before the big final where people will be deselected out of the competition. So I think that's such a lovely scheme for them to offer for Ukrainians in the UK, because I think the big thing about this Eurovision is it is going to be very heavily themed on the Ukraine.
Who foots the bill for all this? Stephanie, because I remember Ireland having it 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
And they were moaning about how much it costs to host it.
Well, it's going to be mostly the European Broadcast Union. They're going to be footing, I think, almost £10 million for it, and the BBC as well. And I know the BBC get a lot of flack, but they're going to have to put money out to kind of support this, because there's a lot of money that's going to have to be involved for security, visa arrangements, bringing the artists over as well.
Because the government's actually forking out an additional 10 million, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just for security, extra security measures, because obviously it's a security risk.
And Liverpool as well, hosting it as well. It's going to have so many cultural activities. So there's a lot of money that's going to go into this.
But it's great for Liverpool, isn't it? Because, I mean, again, as if Liverpool needs putting on the map again. But it for perhaps a generation who don't know a lot about Liverpool.
I haven't been to Liverpool. I hate to say that.
We'll go in May.
I'm going to go in May. You're going to catch me out there in my red hot dress in Liverpool. It has to be done.
Oh, yeah.
I love going over. I lived in Manchester, and if you fancy a change of scene, you just nip over there, 45 minutes in the car.
Not far, is it?
It's a wonderful place.
But you're right, though. It's the city of music, isn't it?
Oh. Yeah.
I mean, the significance of that. I mean, to have Eurovision there, and it's so nice that the Ukrainians will be at the heart of it, really, because they did win, didn't they?
I think it will be a show to remember. They might win again this year, actually, because a lot of people are saying, "Oh, they got the sympathy vote last year,"
which they did.
Rightly
to be fair,
so, but who knows? This year they might come back and win again.
Yeah, you never. Well, it's going to be an interesting one to watch, because it is this. But I tell you what, it is. It's a real show of unity, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
and that's what music does. Brings us all together.
What was the name of the England contestant last year? What was
Sam Ryder.
He kept smiling all the time.
He was like, oh gosh, I have to remember all these facts. He was really good, actually, because we've had some dodgy acts represent the UK before, and for him to land second, that was pretty good.
Has he done much since?
No.
I was going to say, but they usually do, don't they?
No. Well, he's been busy. He's been touring the one song, but yeah, he's been all over the place.
We're being told he's going on a UK tour.
He needs more than one song, doesn't he?
Yeah.
We should go on. I don't know. Chesney Hawkes did it.
The one and only.
That is it from us and from these two, thankfully, for today. We're all back tomorrow morning. See you then.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. This weekend it's dry and settled. There will be some sunshine, and where those skies remain clear, a return of frost at night too. Looking at the pressure pattern, high pressure dominates right through the weekend and actually much of next week too, keeping all the weather systems behind me out in the Atlantic. Lots of dry and settled weather to come. So this morning, it's a dry start for many, frosty start in places, but plenty of sunshine. Just cloudier skies across the north and the east. Keen northerly breeze at first will bring in showers, this easing as we head through into the afternoon. Lots of places staying dry, the best of the sunshine holding on across parts of Northern Ireland, perhaps western Scotland, but most places dry with some bright spells. Temperatures a little lower than recent days, 6 to 9 Celsius, but that's where we should be for the time of year. Perhaps still feeling chilly along some eastern coast with that northerly breeze. Into the evening time, we'll see the clouds starting to melt away, longer, clearer periods developing, though there's still the risk of a few showers coming in off the North Sea down some eastern coasts. Under the clearest skies for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps Wales and southwest England, -2 to -4 Celsius. So a frosty